Good morning and welcome. I'll call to order the September installment of the Downtown Design Review Committee. I'm Nathaniel Harding, and I have the dubious honor of filling in as chair this month. So if I don't look familiar, that's why. But luckily, we have capable staff that will help me along. So as usual, we'll start with roll call.
Corey Bates. Nathaniel Harding.
Present.
Charles Ainsworth.
Present.
Anthony Blatt.
Here.
Betsy Brunstetter. Julie Kriegel. And Connie Scothorn. You have a quorum.
Okay, and I want to recognize a couple of new members. So we have Tony Blatt and Julie Kriegel. This is their first meeting. Welcome to the committee, and we really appreciate your contributions to the community, and I'm sure you'll get a lot out of what we're doing in this body as well. So welcome. Next up is approval of minutes from the August meeting. You've been furnished those in advance. I'll pause for a moment and entertain any motions to approve those.
Move to approve.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Minutes pass, are approved. Cases withdrawn, there are none. Item number 4, continuous requests. So this is where if there are any applicants being considered today that wish to continue to a later date, this is your time to do that. So I'll pause and look around and see if there's any takers on that. Otherwise, we'll move ahead. I want to reorganize the agenda a little bit, and I think you'll see why, but we have a couple of items that are going to require some consideration, but I want to move ahead item 7C first, and then we'll also have item 8A1, and then items 7, A and B, that all relate to the convention center. So I want to group those together. But first up is item 7C, to adopt a resolution recognizing Gigi Faulkner for her service on the Downtown Design Review Committee. So Lisa, do you have something to speak to on that?
Yes, I will read the resolution. Gigi was, many people may or may not know, was one of the inaugural members of the committee, and now she is leaving us, and so it's a very new committee. A resolution of the Downtown Design Review Committee of the City of Oklahoma City acknowledging Gigi Faulkner for her valuable service and dedication to the Downtown Design Review Committee. Whereas Gigi Faulkner has faithfully devoted her time and expertise to serve the citizens of Oklahoma City as a Downtown Design Review Committee member from May 2007 to August 2017, and whereas Gigi Faulkner was among the inaugural group of Downtown Design Review Committee members, and therefore especially charged with establishing and demonstrating enduring standards for committee procedures, conduct, and decorum, and whereas Gigi Faulkner has routinely contributed to the committee by using her expertise as a licensed real estate professional to promote the development and redevelopment of the downtown area, and whereas Gigi Faulkner has demonstrated uncommon dedication to the committee through her methodical attention to detail and earnest regard for the applicable standards and guidelines in the consideration of projects presented to the committee, and whereas Gigi Faulkner's sincerity, collaborative spirit, and compassionate nature have served the community well in resolving conflicts and offering sound, technical, and creative advice to applicants. And whereas the fulfillment of Gigi Faulkner's responsibilities on the committee was achieved, with an earnest devotion to the well-being of the community and the overall betterment of downtown. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Downtown Design Review Committee hereby respectfully commends Gigi Faulkner for her outstanding years of service to the Downtown Design Review Committee of the City of Oklahoma City, adopted by the Downtown Design Review Committee of the City of Oklahoma City on this 21st day of September, 2017.
Excellent. Okay. So is there a motion to approve this?
Adopted.
So moved. Move to approve.
And a second, I hear a second down there? Any debate? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Do you want to
Very well deserved.
invite her to
Yeah.
speak?
Would you like to come up and say some words, Gigi? Speak.
Yeah, I'm going to tell her.
Well, thank you so much. Personally, my overlap was very little with your time, but I do know just from others that have served on this body that your contributions were very valuable, and I really appreciate everything that you've done. So, that's it. Yeah. So I mentioned that we have capable staff. That would remind me if I ever skip something. So I do want to actually now take a step back to the consent docket as item 5A. And is a consideration of possible action on application by Christopher Canale Design for Stacy Sanger, downtown OKC, to paint murals. So is there further information on this before we move this item? Lisa? Do we need to have further information on this item for consent? Or anybody to speak on this?
It's on your consent docket. If you all had questions, the artist is here. You can ask me. It's the next railroad underpass, and hopefully we'll end up with more. So I'm excited to get this one going. And wait about 3 months, 2 months, and it'll be done. So.
You want to say anything else about it? Okay. So.
Move to approve.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That passes as well. And so now the other item I wanted to reconfigure in this agenda is convention, sorry, let me pause. Yes, convention center presentation. That's item 8A1. So do we have somebody presenting on this item?
We do. Adam Pollich with Populous. The Populous team made a presentation of the convention center to the committee sometime in the spring, but because we have new members and because we're about to hear some street closures related to the development, and because they have committed, now that I'm saying it on film, they've committed to submitting for they did submit for the October meeting for approval. So it's such a big project, they wanted the opportunity to go over some of the key concepts before then, so I'll turn it over to Adam.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. It's good to see some familiar faces and the new faces. As Lisa just said, this is an exciting time for us. This is 2 years in the making just for this phase of the project. We have submitted our 95% final plans, and so they're currently being reviewed by the city right now to go to code, so for code review. So certainly a pivotal point in the future of the convention center, but what we wanted to do today was just bring all of you up to speed on some of the design language and some of the overall vision for the project, so that when we do submit for the more robust October meeting, you'll all be a bit more up to speed, and it won't be such a tall order to digest some of the design language. I'll trade you. There we go. So the initial story of the convention center, obviously the site had moved around quite a bit over the previous years, and when we settled on the East Park site, the design story that we came up with was core to shore, earth to sky. So obviously fitting in with the existing content of the story of the core to shore project, and how do you design a building with such presence that actually touches the sky and has a strong foundation next to the park, all the new development with the hotel, and basically the new kind of event district that we have. So we used some inspiration from obviously the design of the park and some of the architecture and some of the materials from around downtown and the region. So basically a palette we developed that's familiar, yet I would say a bit more progressive, if I could go ahead and call it that. So the overall program of the building, it's about 500,000 gross square feet, so it's quite large. 275,000 of that is actual sellable, leasable convention center program. The building is broken up onto 3 levels. As you see, the street level, which is on grade, no parts of this building actually go below, will be below the ground. So we have our 200,000 square foot exhibit hall that actually sits on grade with all of the building entries and associated pre-function. The middle level is where majority of the meeting room program is. It was important for us to break the mold a little bit with these meeting rooms and put these meeting rooms along the glass facade of the building to allow some natural light and some more desirable attributes for what is normally kind of a black box in the meeting room industry. And then the upper level of the facility is the ballroom. So again, the ballroom is your more prominent space in the convention center, and that ballroom is approximately 70 feet in the air at its highest point. And so you would truly have these panoramic views from the ballroom and the exterior balcony that's attached to the ballroom across the park to the new Union Station, to the Skydance Bridge, and to the downtown skyline as well. So the exterior materials, and we'll get into more depth, obviously, when we submit for final approval, but the materials are a mixture of natural materials with I would say, very little manufactured kind of metal panels and such. We thought that it was important to stay within the design language of the natural aspects of the park and the Union Station, specifically across the street. And so we have a mix of a terracotta material for most of the key parts. We have some precast concrete that anchor some of the major key entry spaces. We have a natural wood veneer that we're using on the soffits of all of our overhangs in our entry, and then a mixture of curtain wall and fritted glass to provide a little bit of protection for the people in the building and also to cut down on the glare from the actual glass. So we don't want a situation where the glare is so heavy coming off, the reflection in the glare so heavy coming off the glass and affecting people in the park and on the plaza. So we've taken measures in place to cut down on that. So this is a view inside the park that's obviously under construction and looking west. So you see that behind the building, there is no high-rise development. So when we say earth to sky, it's this is the kind of vision that we're talking about. You'll truly see this building as it stands with little interference from stuff in the background. So it's important for us when we designed it. How do you give prominence to this ballroom in the roof to give it that kind of architectural excellence that you would expect from a building of this stature? Again, the view looking south on Robinson. So these are the meeting rooms that I was speaking of, if you can follow my mouse. Again, so something that's pretty unique in the convention center industry is to take these meeting spaces and put them out in a public forum like this. This is south on Robinson looking up, looking north towards downtown. So this is another one of those south meeting room pods, and this gives you a good chance to see the combination of terracotta along these architectural forms that are protecting these spaces, and all of these soffits here are that natural wood veneer product. It's a product that we're really happy with. We just installed over 30,000 square feet of it on the Sydney Convention Center that just opened this past year in Sydney, Australia. So it's absolutely beautiful. It's dynamic, low maintenance, but it still provides that natural aesthetic that we were going for with the facility. An aerial view showing the fully developed section of Robinson, some of the adjacent plaza spaces. We specifically designed some of the space on this west facade to play nicely with the park, understanding that the park is this large civic amenity. And because of the substantial amount of people that we will have exiting the convention center, we've developed what we're calling collector plazas just to allow for exiting and the seamless transition from people across Robinson from the park to the convention center. This shot is important to us because when you're coming in on Robinson today, it absolutely looks nothing like this. And I think this is truly becoming a gateway to the city with the park and, again, the convention center. So we've had lots of coordination with the park team and all of the Project 180 requirements to meet them all as far as the landscape design, signage requirements, and all of the pedestrian access that's required for a Project 180 project. So this is coming north on Shields. I want to point out a few things. We have our back-of-house loading area. It sits to the east of our facility, and we have mechanical equipment on the roof of the building. So because of this view is so important to us, we felt that it was important to screen the mechanical equipment from pedestrian and vehicles coming north on Shields. This is actually one of the only views where you will have a direct line of sight to some of that mechanical equipment, so it's important for us to take the necessary steps to protect it. And same with this loading area to the east. The product that we're using to protect and screen the loading area is the same metal panel that we're actually using on the west facade. So we're not using a cheaper, more back-of-house looking product back there. It's a Centria perforated panel that will allow the loading area to be ventilated but still protect the views from pedestrians and the public that are circulating around the building there from looking into the loading. The complete aerial, I know everyone's very familiar with what's going on down there, and to see something like this put together in a cohesive package, I think is pretty powerful. And this is that panoramic view that I was talking about from the balcony of the convention center looking west. You see glimpses of downtown, obviously action in the park, Skydance Bridge, and then you can see Union Station popping up there above the tree line. So certainly I know for us, this is most convention centers don't have the ability to be designed next to a brand new park as a civic amenity. So it was important for us to capture this and use it to our advantage in the design of the facility. This is truly unique for the industry, and it's absolutely unique for a convention center to have this kind of amenity at its front door. The elevations that we have calling out specific materials, as you'll see, the palette is fairly consistent between the terracotta, precast concrete, curtain wall glazing, and we have some plaster as well on the building that wrap the non-western facing facades, so the other three facades. And so the overall landscape is broken up into three parts, and the parts that are highlighted with the dashed line, those are add alternates for our project, so they're actually out of our initial scope of work. What we are designing right now is everything that you see that's colored in this plan. So again, this has been heavily coordinated with our landscape team to meet all of the requirements for a landscape design and a plaza design for this building type. The Southwest 4th Street alternate, that is additional scope of work that we're now starting to coordinate with the hotel designers. I know that the hotel team has selected an architect, and so over the next month or so, we'll be coordinating with them to develop this shared plaza along 4th Street between the convention center and the hotel. And the alternate parking area to the south, when we initially were tasked with designing the facility, we had to identify an area for the convention center to expand. And so we developed the building to allow for that expansion to happen to the south. So the plan is, in the meantime, for that south area on the convention center site is to be parking not only for the convention center, but for the park as well, and all of the new developments in the district. So again, it's out of our scope of work now, but it's something that we have planned an effort to allow the convention center to expand in previous years if it needs to get much larger. We have three major signs on the building, exterior signage types. One is an Oklahoma City shadow sign. You can see it here. It's mounted on the south end of the building, and we've done sun studies so that when the sun is casting a shadow at specific times during the day, you will actually see Oklahoma City Convention Center being cast by sunlight onto the south end of the building. I think sometimes convention centers get caught up in the LA Live type LED sensational experience, and we thought that that wasn't quite appropriate here, where we wanted to do something a bit more subtle and unique to bring a little bit of attention to the building. We have sign types that are in the parking lot that correspond to the overall design of the building, and we have a series of these exterior pylons in our plazas that are the directional wayfinding to get people around the site. That's pedestrian and vehicular. A few of the interior views, again, for our meeting in October, the end of October, we'll have updated interior renderings as we have further developed the design. So these are just a shot in the dark of from where we were at preliminary report. So we'll be updating these, but you can start to see the overall feel of the interior space. Lots of natural light, views out to the park, views out to Robinson. This is one of our main circulation vertical circulation corridors, so escalators, stairs. We've tried to visually connect all three levels with each other and to connect them with the outside world. So convention centers typically, they're kind of insular with not a lot of access. So we tried to flip that model on its head for this design. Some of the unique meeting room space on the ground level, a typical meeting room with the access to natural light on this western facade. One of the larger meeting room configurations. And this is the ballroom. So the ballroom is a unique in the way that we have this 60-foot by 20-foot space of operable walls at the front of our ballroom that allow the ballroom to pass through this pre-function area onto that 5,000 square foot balcony that's directly adjacent with those panoramic views. So if you imagine the procession of the ballroom space and its ability to host events inside and outside and provide those dynamic views, again, it's something that's certainly unique in convention centers and absolutely unique to Oklahoma City and this site. So that's I could talk about this for maybe 2 full days. That's the abbreviated version. I would appreciate if anybody has any questions or comments. We're here to answer, and if not, we're preparing for our more robust meeting here in October.
Yeah, I'll also point out that the design team handed out copies of the presentation to the committee that you can look at after the meeting.
Cool.
That's a great presentation. Any questions? So
Nathaniel, I think you've seen this presentation
Yeah,
maybe
I've seen it
30
a few
times.
You're getting better.
Good.
This started off really good.
Thank you.
No, they done really well to collaborate with other parts of development in the area, and I think it shows. You can see it in the work. So that sets itself up for the next couple of items. As I mentioned, we're going to reorient the agenda a little bit, so now we're on items 7A and B. So that was the context for 7A, which is CE 00958 at 102 Southwest 3rd Street. And Laura, can you set that up for us?
This is a request to close an alley that is located where the Convention Center Hotel is going to be going. Sorry. That didn't work out the way I thought it was going to work, did it? I don't know where. Paula's going to fix this for me. This used to be where one of the ramps for I-40 was. Right now, there is a building located on the west side of the block. There we go. And I was going to show you pictures. And now my mouse isn't working. Of the site. So 40, you can see 40 used to be immediately north. You see Chesapeake as well. And so I can't, oh, okay. And so right now, there's some trees. It's pretty much vacant. You can see Chesapeake over here and Devon Tower. And, sorry, this is so big that I can't. There's some buildings around. This is the ONG, OG&E area. So for the most part, everything around it has been torn down or is in the process of being torn down for the convention center, including the OG&E substation, which is south of this site. So this is just one step in the process of actually going forward with the design of the convention center hotel. And you're making a recommendation. This goes through the process and goes to Planning Commission. It actually goes next week to the Planning Commission. And staff's recommending
Okay.
approval.
Thank you. Any questions or any motions?
Yeah, we're on A.
I make a motion that we recommend approval to the Planning Commission for the request to close the alley easement.
Second?
Skowthorne, Ainsworth, motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The 7A passes.
Thank you.
So then 7B, similar, but the address is 500 South Robinson Avenue.
Okay.
And we had that on the screen.
Click. It's going the wrong place. so I'm not sure why. I'm sorry. 960 is another request, but this is to close. There's several alleys as well as, that is so strange, streets that have to be closed for the development of the convention center, and you just saw a presentation on that. Thanks, Paula. So it goes from 4th down to 7th. If you go out in that area right now, there's literally only one building left that's kind of over by E.K. Gaylord. Everything else except for the Ogini substation has totally been demolished. And so part of what's going to be going on with the convention center is Broadway is going to be relocated half block to the east of where it is. So that's why they're also, the request is to close Broadway. And they have to do this prior to going to district court for the vacation of all of this. The issue that staff included in the report is there's a guideline that talks about the traditional neighborhood blocks. And what we stated is, while recognizing that what the guidelines state, there isn't any way to develop this proposal without eliminating the streets and the alleys because the building is larger than a traditional block. And so staff is recommending approval of this, and it goes to the Planning Commission next week as well.
Thank you. Any questions or motions on this item?
I make a motion that we recommend approval to the Planning Commission to close the right-of-ways and the streets. Mentioned.
Skowthorne motion,
Second.
and a Blatt second. So you're on the record now. You're official. Okay, so all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. So that item passes. Okay, thank you. So now we're back to cases for individual consideration. That's item 6. We have 2 items here, and I recognize that we have a lot of people here that you're probably not here to see what I would wear today. You're probably here because you're interested in these items. But I do want to just make a comment that if we can be very diligent with the commentary, make sure you sign in when you get to the podium. I don't want to set any time limits because that's arbitrary, but just be considerate of the fact that we have a lot of interested people. Keep your comments novel and germane. Remember the Gettysburg Address was 2 minutes long, just saying. No, but these are important items and they should be considered, so we want to make sure that everybody gets heard. So the first one is item 6A, that's DTCA 17 00076 at 601 West Main Street. While Laura's pulling that up.
I'm sorry, before you get started, I'd like to abstain from this item.
Okay.
This is the parking garage between Main and Colcord Drive. It was heard at last month's meeting and was continued to this meeting to give the design team an opportunity to pick up some of the committee comments and some of the public comments. I'll just point out that both sides will make their full presentations, but I'll point out that the design in your packet picked up a lot of staff's comments from before the last meeting. And I don't know if I know 2 of you don't remember. Some of you do remember. We had some design changes before the last meeting. All of those have been incorporated in what you see in your packet and what's on the screen. So what's in your packet, what's on the screen is the design that's being proposed. And also in the past several days since we issued the staff report, the various parties have submitted multiple briefs and various pieces of supporting documentation. We emailed those out to the committee in the past several days. There are additional paper copies here that I believe the presenters will reference to you. And with that, I will let the applicant start.
Okay.
Good morning. I'm Scott Dedman with ADG, 920 West Main. We're in the Fred Jones building.
You get rolled in the alley?
Pardon me?
Yeah.
cycling accident. It's bad trying to stay healthy. So I will try to be brief since we presented this before and we spent several hours last time on this. So I'll try to go through mine rather quickly, but I know that Tony and Julie are new to this, and so I would like to go through the full presentation again. Yes, please. I'll do my best. So the 601 Main Street project, it's a parking garage, obviously a mixed-use parking garage. Ground floor is commercial space, and we are providing 13,000 square feet of commercial space, and we have the opportunity to face commercial space both on Colcord and on Main Street, which is kind of a unique opportunity. Above the commercial space, there are 5 levels of parking deck, elevated parking deck. The garage itself is 262 spaces. Most of that is going to be used during the day for the police association members. They currently park in multiple surface parking lots kind of throughout that part of downtown. There's going to be 25 spaces for the commercial tenants, another 100 spaces for monthly parkers of adjacent properties within that district, and then 12 hourly spaces would be provided for public parking for use at the park or just doing business in that area. It is a precast structure, and then we are cladding the north and south facades of that with architectural metal panel and then custom metal fins that provide ventilation and aesthetics for that deal. Sorry, driving with the wrong hand here. So here's our project site. Again, you can see that it fronts on both Colcord and Main Street. The ground floor level, you can see the blue commercial space. It's broken up with the ramps that lead up, but we have angled one ramp to align with the center line of Dewey Avenue and brings that in. So we have an entry from Main Street, and then we also have an entry from Colcord. And then the stairwells are located in the opposite corners. There's a connecting corridor that connects to Main Street and Colcord so that people can use the elevator and exit on either side of the building. The typical parking layout is 55 spaces per floor, but it's a very simple garage, just a double helix garage with sloping ramps on 2 sides. It's a pretty tight site. And, of course, we want to fit within the context of that area, so that's one thing we're trying to achieve. So, of course, a lot of our inspiration was pulled from the Civic Center, shots at night. And, some of the things that are of particular interest to us that we picked up on were the fluting of the columns at the entry, the architecture or the aluminum detailing of the lanterns, of the window fenestrations, also the buildings at City Hall and Courthouse, the aluminum fret that is, or scrim that is covering the windows is really reflected in these aluminum fins that we're proposing for the exterior. Just looking around the context of the site, we have a lot of different materials. So we've got limestone, we've got tan brick, we've got red brick, we've got seems like we've got a lot of plaster buildings in this area. Again, a lot of limestone buildings. So really kind of a mix of palettes of materials that we're working with. One of the things that's very important, I think, is maintaining that street activation. While we're allowed to have a single-use garage in this area, we've chosen to do commercial space on the ground floor, and that's just a continuation of the street activation of Main Street and the things that are occurring on Main Street right now. And since that's our office in the top right-hand corner, we're very, very interested in seeing the development of Main Street. So the history of the site's also kind of interesting to us as well. As we were doing our research, we found that there was a building on this site, and it stood there until the 1950s, we believe. And it was the Oklahoma Storage Building. And it was a remnant of the rail yard that used to go through that area. But so are the majority of the buildings on either side of the park. They're either remnants or they've been renovations of buildings that stood there at one time. And this was an interesting photograph that we found as well, that you can see the Civic Center and that building in context with each other. And I think you can see from this how that building does not draw away from the Civic Center. It just helps to add to the sort of the vibrancy of that area. So this was the concept that we presented on the 17th of August. Still somewhat similar. Some of the well, I'll go into the comments here. Some of the comments were that the precast facades needed some additional detailing. The precast facades needed a more consistent finish, and we'll talk about that. The north and south facades might have felt a little bit heavy with the size of the fins that we were using. And there's comments about maybe vertical breaks would help to break up the north and south facades. We brought a new sample of the finished material. I want to pass that around here in a minute. And then some discussion about sort of articulation in the storefront facades. So you can see the difference in the new design from the one that was presented on the 17th of August. So the way the building's set up is we have solid precast panels on the east and west. There are some articulations that we'll show in more detail in a minute. The one thing about the precast panels, those are the party walls, and traditionally those party walls have been a utilitarian material on either side in downtown development because they're built on the property line with the intent that another building is going to be built adjacent to that in the future. So it's either been a common brick, a lot of times it's been concrete. The 529 building is concrete block that's been painted. So, it's usually a very common material in those areas. We feel like, however, that the precast concrete is a very good match for the limestone that we see throughout. There are several projects that have been built recently actually by Lingo Construction, the same contractor that we'll be using on this project. So the 123 Garage, the Fassler Hall project, both in downtown, using a precast concrete finish. And what we're proposing is to use a sandblasted precast, a lightly sandblasted, which will take some of the inconsistencies of the precast off and have a purer look to the precast, so a much more consistent look. Then the view from Colcord. We used lighted masts, is what we're calling them, to create some vertical separations and break up the proportions of the ventilated panels on the front. So you'll see that. So that creates an interesting detail that would be pretty fun to see at night. Of course, all of that work would be done out of aluminum. There's been some comments I know made that we're not allowed to use aluminum. I believe the intent of that is speaking to vinyl siding and aluminum siding and metal building siding. That's the intent that's in the zoning ordinance, not architectural aluminum. This would be architectural aluminum, and it would be a powder-coated finish. So the aluminum's used so that it does not rust. The powder coating is a vinyl finish. And do we have that sample? And we'll pass a sample of the actual powder-coated finish around. So again, this is a very high-end finish, very quality. Not vinyl or not aluminum siding or metal building panels. And then we drew a lot from details that we found on the buildings surrounding it. So these are a couple of details from the Museum of Art, the Civic Center. And that helped to inspire the architectural metal fins. And did we bring the big mock-up today? No. Okay, so this is a photograph of the mock-up that Lingo Construction built for this. And as you can kind of see, it moves and the openings move. So it's a very lacy, and it changes as you move across the facade of the building. And then adjacent to that, we have architectural metal panels with some perforated architectural metal panels that open into the stairwell to provide both ventilation and also visibility to the outside. And that's material that we can find within that district as well. So it's not a foreign material to to the district. And then one of the comments was adding some articulation. So really simply all we did was we had the glass proud of the columns originally, and that gave us a little more square footage and saved a little cost on covering the columns. We brought that glass back in so that the columns themselves are expressed on the outside, and those columns would be clad in a masonry cladding, which is an Arriscraft, which is a CSMU material, so it's a limestone-like appearing material. So that would be used at the ground floor. And specifically, we want to talk about building scale because we know that's a big issue. So everything that the downtown ordinance speaks to, the downtown design district ordinance speaks to, is on its purpose and intent is to creating a more urban environment, a more dense environment, and how do we promote that? So we have the zoning ordinance, which we have to follow, and it is an ordinance. And then we have this downtown development framework, which is a guideline. The minimum height requirement that we have to meet is 50 feet or 3 stories. That's by zoning. We have to be that tall. The development framework recommends between 1 and 5+ stories in every category. So there's several different typologies within that framework, and we're certainly meeting those. So if you look at this minimum height, so if we have a minimum height of 50 feet and 3 stories, that roughly translates into 16'9" per story. So if you were to look at that as what would you do if you built a 4-story building? We'd be looking at 66 feet 9 inches. So just a 4-story building would be that tall. So we look back at this project site. Historically, we see the building that was in that place. We blew that up, did a little interpolation. And it's hard to see the numbers there, but we know that it was about 170 feet long based on the size of the site, and that would work out to be about 66 feet tall, and it is a 4-story building. Now you can see some of the other adjacent heights around the site. So we're anywhere from 17 feet to 105 feet on the Civic Center. So there's a wide variety of heights within that entire district. And the building we're proposing, the primary to the top of the fins on the Colcord side, we're at 60 foot 9 inches. So we're 10 foot 9 inches above the minimum. And then on the Main Street side, we're at 65 foot 4. I want to talk about 529 a little bit because that seems to be the benchmark that we're trying to judge the context against. 529 is a little bit of an anomaly in downtown. It sits back from the street. It's only 15 feet tall. It's a project that could not be built now based on the current zoning, so it could not be duplicated. It was a bit of an anomaly when it was there in the 1940s, 1950s, when the existing building was there, because it did sit back from the street, had such a setback. But again, that's something that just adds to the character of downtown. So, we talked about 529 a little bit. If we start looking at limiting the height on this property below what is proposed on this, that means that we're going to limit the ability to develop a 4-story building, a 4-story office building, 5-story mixed-use building, which is what's going on around 21C right now. So none of those could be done on this site. And also, I would say that none of those things could be done on any of the adjacent sites as well, because if you imply or apply a limit on this height, you need to do that equally on all of the adjacent sites to the park. And really that results in a rezoning of that area, not just a call on this one project. This photograph has been brought up several times. This is just an odd project. This was done by an architect trying to prove something, and building within a burned out section of a brownstone row. This building is a little bit ridiculous. I mean, it's ridiculous because It's ridiculous in proportion in height. It's not a natural proportion in height. I think if you look at it in a more natural proportion where the height and the width were something you would typically see in a downtown, I think the effect is much, much less and much more realistic. This is something that happens in downtowns across the United States. I mean, this is just the way downtowns develop, and that's what helps to create that vibrancy in the downtown areas. And you can see that's what's happened here between the Hightower building and the new parking garage on Main Street with the Hightower Annex. And this diversity of heights. I think this is a great shot of Main Street in the 60s. And it really shows, that's when I was a kid and my mom used to bring me down to Main Street. It shows the activity and the diversity of the heights and the excitement of just seeing the buildings going on. It'd be a much different picture if all of those buildings were the same height running down Main Street. So just in closing real quick, we feel like this building is historically within context, architecturally within context. I think we've tried to replicate some details in a modern type way to make an interesting facade on this building. We've created street activation with the commercial space and the covered canopies. And I want to talk a little bit about just parking garages in general. Parking garages are placeholders, just like parking lots are placeholders. So this is a shot of the Galleria site quite a few years ago. So we had a parking garage right on the corner, right on the hard corner of the Galleria site originally. A few years ago, our firm was hired to do the city center garage, where we moved all of that parking to the core of that block. And now that block has become the Devon Center. So the parking garages are placeholders. When it comes to a point where we're driving autonomous cars, where rideshare is a common thing, where we have public transportation and parking garages are no longer used, I don't think anybody's going to shed a tear to tear down a parking garage and build housing in its place. So I think just, again, in closing, just we feel like this, we've responded to the concerns that were discussed last time we met with DDRC. This garage replaces a square block of parking. That parking makes it possible for other pieces of land that the police association have to be able to be developed into other uses. This is definitely a more expensive solution than operating surface parking lots, but it gets cars off of surface lots. It activates the street level. It encourages additional development with the district, because now we have parking in that district. It encourages denser development within those adjacent areas. If we limit everything to 2 stories, we're going to have a suburb within downtown Oklahoma City. Let's see, it also provides very convenient parking for everybody that uses the Civic Center and uses the park, not just the few that live on the sides of the park. And again, as I said before, it is a placeholder for future development. So with that, I am done. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the committee before we hear comments from anybody that wishes to be heard?
Has there been any study done with respect to, or any thought to how the aluminum is going to work with respect to both sound and light, glare, reflectivity, and how the fins are going to deal with wind? Has there been anything done with that?
It's a pretty dull finish. I mean, it's not a bright, shiny aluminum finish, so I think we're good with that.
With glare? What about sound?
Yeah, I don't foresee any big issues with glare. It certainly won't be like the light that's reflected off of Devon Tower or anything like that.
Okay. What about sound? Because I see some of the fins going up to kind of points. Mm-hmm. Is there any thought or consideration with respect to how they're going to act when we have a really windy day?
I think, Tony, those are some things that we will look at as we engineer those panels and the stiffness of those panels. Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so this is the portion where we can welcome any feedback and from from any guests here today?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Kelly Work, and I'm here representing Dennis and David Box and the Real Property LLCs, through which they own several properties in this area, and we're here in opposition to this application, and I'd like to visit with you about that, if I could. My address, my law office is located at 105 North Hudson in the Hightower Building downtown. Dennis and David Box own the 520 West Main building that is adjacent to the east of the subject property, and they, as Mr. Dedman mentioned, is a one-story building that was built in approximately the 1920s. The Box family also owns other property just east of the 520 West Main building, and then they own property on the south side of Main Street, just west of Dewey. And then Dennis and his wife, Chris, own and live in the mixed-use condominium office building that is at 515 Colcord Drive, fronting onto the park. In just a couple of minutes, I will introduce a few visitors that wish to make comment about the application, and also just give some perspective on Oklahoma City downtown development. And they include State Representative Forrest Bennett, who's here, and then former City Councilman Pete White, and former Planning Commissioner Nick Gales. And then also Richard McCowan is present and would like to make a few comments. And we asked Richard to review the application and to offer his observations on this proposal, and on and also just in light of his experience as a mixed-use downtown developer who has done a number of successful developments, mixed use in nature, in an urban setting. First off, I want to just identify, and you all have been provided with copies of this. You should have. We just prepared an exhibit just showing the persons who have joined in the protest to this application, and they're shown on this exhibit shaded in blue. So each of those that are identified in blue is also shown here on this exhibit. But each of those property owners have joined in the protest to this application, and on the north side there, the petition opposing the application has been signed by Ron Bradshaw, who is the developer of the new Civic condos, which is a residential project that has just recently been completed on the north side of the Civic Center. And then David Greenwell signed the protest petition on behalf of the 531 Couch Limited LLC that owns the property there at 531, and then Dennis Brown on behalf of John Niemeyer, who owns the building there to the east on the north side. And then on the south side, included among the properties owned by the Box family, are the properties owned by Rex Travis and Randy Hill, Bob Sullivan, who's here today. John Williams represents the upstairs and downstairs venture that is there about in the middle of the park. And then west of the subject property, the Southern Oaks, Brian and John Griffin, and they were here at the last meeting. I think Brian was going to try to be here today as well. And then Mr. Plater, who owns the building there on the west edge. And then also we just wanted to bring to your attention that the architects that have been involved with projects in this area, including Rand Elliott, who was the architect for the redesign of the Bicentennial Park that was completed in 2012, he also has joined in signing the protest to this application. Rick Brown, who was the architect for the MAPS-funded upgrade to the Civic Center, also has joined in the protest to this application. And then Bruce Bacchus, who is an architect and designed the 515 Colcord Drive building where Dennis and his wife live presently, has also joined in the protest to the petition. So, of course, those persons are very directly affected by this proposed parking garage and are interested in encouraging development that's going to complement the area and particularly complement the Civic Center Park. They're all joining in the protest and ask that you not allow a 6-story, 68-foot tall parking garage to be located at this site. The 529 West Main building I want to mention just briefly because it's an example of the type of mixed-use development that is possible in this area. It was totally renovated after having been used as the Grace Cleaners building for decades by Dennis and David when they purchased it. It now has an interior design firm that also sells retail household furnishings at that location. So we would just suggest to you that it's the type of development that the downtown design framework encourages, the kind of mixed use with retail, commercial on Main Street that is the type of use, mixed use, that the framework encourages and promotes. In their presentation, Mr. Dedman showed that photograph of the building that existed on the subject property back in the 1940s and apparently into the 1950s. But in our view, the fact that there was a 4-story brick warehouse on the subject property more than 50 years ago is irrelevant to your consideration of this application today. This committee is to review the application in light of the current zoning ordinances and the downtown development framework that was approved by the City Council in September of 2015 after a significant review process that included all of the downtown design committees, including this committee, was involved in that process. This proposal for a 6-story parking garage, in our view, is not in compliance with the guidelines that are set forth in the framework. One of the guiding principles that the guidelines set forth is that any proposed development downtown that requires this review under the guidelines is to be context sensitive, and this proposal does not meet that criteria. The garage is simply too tall, it's too massive in scale, and it is incompatible in design and materials for the historic and civic architecture in this area. According to the guidelines, they are intended to promote downtown as a vital mixed-use area and to enhance existing structures. This proposal would detract from the existing structures in this 2-block area along Main Street and Colcord Drive between Lee and Walker. There are, all of the buildings in that 2-block stretch are not more than 2 stories, and they are predominantly brick in their use of their exterior materials. This project would be detrimental to the surrounding area, and it would serve to discourage the kind of mixed-use development that the guidelines are seeking to promote. It would detract from the Bicentennial Park and it would further detract from, in our view, the Civic Center and City Hall. The buildings that are around the park are between 1 to 3 stories tall, and they predominate at the 2-story level. Now, we recognize and understand that under the ordinance, the minimum today is a 3-story building or 50 feet. We understand that's what the requirement is, and we recognize that. There is, as I mentioned, there's a new residential development that has been built on the north side of the Civic Center, and the potential is there for significantly more residential development in this area around the park, which would more appropriately realize the park as an active gathering space. That's the objective, one of the objectives that the downtown framework is seeking to promote. We have this significant investment that has been made in upgrading the park, and with this formal design that was implemented in 2012. And it serves its purpose best if it is an active gathering space. And in our view, establishing a parking garage at a prime location adjacent to the park is going to do very little to contribute to pedestrian activity or the type of activity in the park that the guidelines seek to promote. Now, as Mr. Dedman mentioned, on opposite ends of the park, east and west, are the Art Deco Civic Center building and the City Hall building. And those two buildings, together with the courthouse building, the Civic Center buildings together, are among the most significant and important buildings in downtown. As your staff report states, the Civic Center and City Hall and the park should be the focal points of this area. Any new construction along the park, according to the guidelines, should be subservient to the historic structures. The recent renovation of the Main Street Arcade at Main Street and Lee is an example of the type of development that is happening along Main Street. It's lower in scale, it preserves the historic character of the area, and it preserves the red brick materials that predominate along Main Street. The design guidelines also address scale and massing, and suggest and direct that they are to be considered on a site-specific basis. So it's appropriate for this committee to consider scale and massing with regard to the surrounding development. The purpose is stated under the guidelines, quote, to encourage appropriately scaled development and to promote context-sensitive development, close quote. New buildings under the guidelines should, quote, enhance existing structures. By way of example, and this is, you all also have a copy of this as well, and Mr. Dedman made reference to it in his presentation, but the photograph that appears there in the lower left-hand corner where it shows the extreme height differential of a 6-story building adjacent to 2-story buildings is placed there, and it's an extreme example, no doubt, but it's there to illustrate the extreme height differential that the guidelines would discourage. That is the type of incompatibility that should not be allowed. And we suggest that if this 6-story garage is allowed to be established in this 2-block area where the buildings do not exceed more than 2 stories directly adjacent to the park, that it's not going to be compatible with the guidelines set out in the framework. The garage that is proposed is not sensitive to the character of the surrounding area. It would impact adversely the park. it would also adversely detract from the Civic Center building and from the City Hall building. The precast concrete walls on the west and east sides of the proposed parking garage would be visible from the steps of both the Civic Center and City Hall and from the park. And they would detract from the predominantly red brick construction that exists on these buildings that run along this 2-block stretch of Main Street. This is simply not the place for a standalone parking garage. The opportunity is there for the city for there to be a mixed use, including residential development, which will be the preferable type of activity that would enhance the park as an active gathering space. If this garage is allowed to go forward at this location, it will, in our view, impede that possibility, and it will make the residential development around the park much less likely. Our suggestion is that there needs to be greater level of imagination brought to consider what could happen on this site and with the other property around the park. A parking garage would be a step backwards, in our view, from realizing the potential that the park provides. I just want to make reference just very briefly to the zoning ordinance in Section 7200.1, which is the ordinance that creates the downtown design districts. And it states in the section that sets out what the purpose of the districts are, it says that the development regulations and guidelines in this district are intended to ensure that a proposed use is compatible with the commercial, cultural, historic, and governmental significance of the downtown districts. So those ordinances and guidelines are what this committee is to apply in making a determination as to the appropriateness of a particular development project. And we suggest to you that that this one does not satisfy the guidelines and will be a negative impact overall on the park and the area. At this time, I know that Representative Forrest Bennett has a time commitment, so I'd like to call on him and ask him to come up. He's the state representative that represents the district that includes this area, and I want to give him an opportunity to state his views.
Hey, it's really great to see you. Nathaniel, I was interested in what you were wearing today, so tie was a strong choice. I know that it's pretty bold for someone from the state legislature to come and try to tell you how to do your job, since we're not doing a very good job of ours, but I did want to come because some of the people here are constituents, and just to implore you to consider the fact that you have a unique opportunity to shape the future of downtown Oklahoma City. I'm sure that that is not lost on you. It's my personal opinion that that we would be wise to steer ourselves away from building more parking garages downtown and design and build downtown Oklahoma City such that we are encouraging the use of our feet, of public transit, and that Oklahoma City has gone through several iterations of trying to plan our city, and we have looked back decades later and wished we had gone a different direction. You all have the opportunity today and through this to say that these plans aren't good enough, that we need to look at something else. I'm absolutely for mixed use development. I'm absolutely for making sure that we get people downtown. I mean, I think more people park in my district than anywhere else in the state, and I'm happy that people come down here and invest their money. I want us, as we bring the streetcar online and other things like that, to design downtown in a way that works towards further investment in public transit, further investment in foot traffic, not in car traffic. I've heard from people at John Rex Elementary and things that the traffic around the school is problematic, and something like this may only add to it. So with not much else technically to say, I just want you to know, yesterday I was on the other side of a table with Mr. Box, fighting his big bag corporate clients, but today we're on the same side of the issue because not only do my constituents want something done, but I firmly believe that downtown has a bright, bright future, and small decisions like this really make a huge impact later on down the road. So I wish you the best of luck in your decision. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, next I'd like to call on former Planning Commissioner Nick Gales, who served on the Oklahoma City Planning Commission from 1993 until 2015, and then also during that time served on the Board of Adjustment for a period of time. And he has some comments that he'd like to share with you.
Good morning. Representative just said, I'm not going to try to tell you how to do your job. I didn't appreciate that when I was sitting up there, but I will give you a little bit of background. One, I've never been here to speak for any type of an application before any board or commission. This is my first time, so it's a little different down here. Dennis Box called me back in August and asked if I would review the application and tell him what I thought. I reviewed it. I told him I didn't believe it met the standards. Had some other issues with the site and egress and whatnot, but I'm not going to go into those today. What I would like to speak to you today about is what I just handed you, the guidelines themselves. Those guidelines were adopted after a lot of agony, grief, blood on the sidewalk from the public, from different commissions, committees. This particular committee approved those guidelines. What I've given you there is the two resolutions, one from the Planning Commission adopting the resolution, and one from the City Council adopting the guidelines, both recently, 2 years ago, August of 2015. The guidelines themselves are just that. They're guidelines, but they're important. That's what people rely on. That's what the public relies on. We've had a great deal of public input from these. When I reviewed the initial staff report, it noted numerous deficiencies, and kind of looked like a no-brainer. When I received the current staff report, a number of those issues had been addressed. You'll notice in handout, the last page, I have that wonderful picture that seems like everyone wants to talk about. Mr. Dedman talked about it. Mr. Work just talked about it. That issue has not been addressed. And to me, that is the principal issue. When you look at that, read the caption that I've highlighted under that picture and tell me how this applies. For the staff report, and I know it's the applicant's argument, but for the staff report to make the argument that there was a historic or old building there before is disingenuous and ludicrous. That picture, as extreme as it is, that I've given you and that's posted up here, was put in those guidelines for the very reason to show what not to do. Well, when you examine this application, you see that what we're trying to prevent in that extreme example is the very thing that this application is doing. Guidelines are there for people to rely on, for the public to rely on, so everybody knows what the deal is. Ironically, I was watching TV over the weekend, and I saw the city manager on TV, and he was asked about the election we had last Tuesday. And why do you think the support was so strong? And he said it was public trust. The public trust what we do and trust City Hall. Well, that trust is eroded when we don't follow guidelines, when we don't follow the city plan. And, you know, I ask you, just look at this thing on the face. It does not meet your criteria. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, I'd like to call on former City Councilman Pete White. Mr. White served on the Oklahoma City Planning Commission before he was elected to the City Council in 1982. He served then on the City Council from 1982 to 1989, and then after a breather, he came back in 2005 and served until 2017. So we'd like to ask Mr. White to come forward and offer his comments about this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm Pete White, 13733 Southeast 134th Street. I want to try to, I've said this before, I said it when I sit there and where Julie's sitting now. I always said I'd keep it brief. Well, I'm going to really try hard to do that today. I know this is long, and it's been long for all of us. But my first comment is one of the things that I've done since I left the council is I've become much more involved with parks. And when I see this situation with parks, you know, we have examples where parks are walled in. There's a couple of places like that. The little strip of what used to be Main Street that's just east of Robinson is a walled-in little tiny park. Kerr Park is walled in effect. But if you look at the historical significance of where this land is located, that the Civic Center's on, that City Hall's on, that the county's on, where this is located, that was a railroad at one time. That railroad was taken out, and from Broadway to Chartel, it's all public use. That entire strip is public use. To use the example that a building that existed on the south side, that's where this garage is supposed to go, was at one time several stories tall, it was several stories tall when it was built next to a railroad. It wasn't several stories tall built next to the Civic Center or built next to a park. So I think if we have the opportunity to protect an open park like the Civic Center Park is between the City Hall and the Civic Center, we should not fail to protect it. I mean, just guidelines, whatever they are, but just common sense tells me that if you have that strip of land there that is open, not more than 3 stories on either side from where the park starts at Walker as it goes west, you shouldn't wall that off. It just doesn't make not aesthetically proper, and it obviously doesn't follow the guidelines. There are design elements to the redesign of the Civic Center Park that I and some others, when it came through the council, were opposed to. Some of those design elements have been utilized in this design as they're trying to follow that. Well, it seems to me that some of those things, especially the triangular designs, they are not now, and they will never be consistent with the way the rest of the park looks. Now, I know I've dealt with architects, and I understand that they see the world somewhat different than engineers. In fact, we had a newspaper article about architects and engineers and city managers not too long ago concerning this very topic. But I felt like they were not consistent. Mainly the triangular kind of designs, the big things that are on either side of the park, right in front of the, either side of the park, right in front of the Civic Center. They just didn't seem consistent with the rest of it. Again, that's just another example, I think, of something that's not quite consistent and then being replicated again and used as an excuse to design something else a way that is totally inconsistent. Lastly, I'd like to close with something, and this is something that's public information for all of you. There are 2 other parking garages in that area, both of them operated by the City of Oklahoma City. They're the 2 lowest performing parking garages financially in the city's list of parking. You can look on COTPA's records and you'll see that. They're the 2 lowest performing parking garages. Now, you can just take that for what it's worth. But as somebody that's got, as all of us are people that have to pay the bills for City Hall, I would hate to see that. Hate to see that situation erode further. It's been a real privilege. This is the first time I've been back on this side of the microphone since I left council in April, and so it's for the first time back in probably 20 years I've been on this side, and it's a real privilege to be here today to talk to y'all. I want to tell you how much I appreciate your service too. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, our final witness for our portion is Richard McCown. I'd like him to come forward and just offer a few comments.
I brought a lot of different sources for notes here. My apologies. My name's Richard McCowan. My office address is 30 Northeast 2nd Street, box number 4. Downtown is amazing, and it's important, and it's the one part of the city that belongs to all of us. My interest in this site goes back several years because in addition to the properties that are mentioned here that Dennis and David Box have, they also have an amazing site across the street. And what really is amazing and interesting about that site for our company is that particular city block is 190 feet deep. Most of the blocks in the city of Oklahoma City are 140 feet deep. They're kind of everywhere, 140 feet. And 140 feet is a difficult size when you're doing urban development because a parking garage usually takes up 124 feet. So it leaves you about 16 feet that you can build this very thin facade. But across the street to the south, you have, on the south side of Main, you have these extraordinary blocks that are 190 feet deep. And so you can build a very efficient parking garage that runs perpendicular to the street, to Main Street, and still get 66 feet of depth. And that's extraordinary for many reasons. That's a very useful depth for commercial development. And the police association owns several parking lots on that side of the street. I really wished we had had an opportunity to sit down with the police association and talk about this site. And I was willing to give my time, just as, you know, a founding member of the Oklahoma chapter of the Urban Land Institute, and somebody who loves downtown and believes in downtown and wants to see more people living down here, because that's what it's going to take to make downtown great. They've got this site on the other side of the street that could easily accommodate their parking needs. It could also serve for parking for Civic Center events. It's not a very far walk. And they could still build a proper building, a proper bit of urbanism with true active frontage, ground floor, office or retail, maybe office on the upper stories or residential on the upper stories, and still accommodate their parking garage. I've looked at this site. Certainly if we had the opportunity to develop it, I would sit down with my team and say, I think we can get about 40 to 45 parking spaces. We can get some retail, maybe about 16 to 1,800 square feet on each side, both on Colcord and Main. And then we can probably get somewhere between 40 and 45 apartments or condominiums on the upper stories. I think it would be great. I think it would be a great location to do an investment like that because it's a precious location. You know, it's a location that has all the civic investment around it that's never going to go away. We're never going to give up this building. We're never going to abandon the Civic Center. Those are legacy monuments that we built over generations, and we continue to reinvest in them. What's interesting about the idea of calling this a placeholder building and that it eventually will go away, I was part of a delegation from our city that Anchorage, Alaska was one of 43 cities that's come to visit Oklahoma City and said, we want to learn how you all have done it, how you have transformed and made your downtown amazing. Can you come up and look at downtown Anchorage? So a small group of us flew up there last December, which I don't recommend. It's very cold in Anchorage. And one of the most memorable meetings was standing on top of a parking garage almost identical to this one. It was 17 degrees outside and the sun wasn't out because it was December in Anchorage. And we were shivering and shaking and making drawings trying to figure out how they could build apartments into and retrofit this existing parking garage, because the parking garage had become one of their biggest nuisance buildings downtown. In fact, it was very close to City Hall, and it was just slightly oriented differently to where the stairwell was right outside the mayor's office door. And he said, I regularly have to call because there are people having sex in the parking, in the stairwell of the parking garage. And that's not a good thing to have happening behind your desk when you're trying to meet with somebody, convincing them to come do business in downtown Anchorage. If it's a placeholder building and it's essentially a nuisance building, it's hard to sort of claim that the police parking garage would be a nuisance building, but it will be essentially, because it isn't an active building. This is essentially office space on the ground floor, and while many of us work late, we do have a tendency to go home after 6:30 or 7 p.m. I know architects stay really late, but still, the upper floors, this is essentially a suburban building. And what do I mean by that? You think about, in order to have the suburbs, we have to have structures downtown that are the enabling structures. We just made one of the largest, most painful investments that's taken place over years with Project 180. And we've been undoing the one-way streets and the absence of on-street parking. And all of that was designed back in the 70s to make it super easy to just race out of downtown as fast as possible when the clock struck 5 so we could get back to Edmond or Norman. This is a building that enables more of that kind of behavior. It's essentially the dealer, if you will, to the suburban addict that says, I want to come to the Civic Center, and now you've made it really easy for me to slip in and slip out, use the city for 2.5 hours, not make an investment, not come down and be part of the city, not be the eyes on the street. We're just in, we're out, and then we'll leave this to whoever needs to be wandering around the park. And that brings me to my thoughts about Jane Jacobs. Her monumental book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, describes 4 different parks in the city of Philadelphia. Philadelphia, being a very old city, has these 4 parks that are equal distance away from the city hall. And she describes in great detail how one of those parks has an active mixture of uses where you have, in the early morning, the people coming in to get their coffee at the coffee shops. In the mid-morning, the moms with their baby strollers because they live and there's residential above, and they're out in the park. And then at noon, you've got people coming back for lunch, and then she winds this all the way through to the late evening with the young single people going on dates, and she describes an 18-hour active use. And then she contrasts that to the usage where it's just office. this Euclidean separation of uses. Here we're back to separation of uses. Here's a single use, office and parking. It's active during a very brief moment of the day, and then there's no contribution in the evening hours to help keep activity and eyes on the street, on eyes on the park. And so then that park gets taken over by folks who are intimidating to young families. And we need to take care of our homeless, no doubt, but we don't need to have the vagrant population hanging out in the middle of one of our most precious locations where lots and lots of investment has been made for high-quality downtown housing. I think there's a really good opportunity for the police association to meet their parking needs just across the street on another one of their locations. I think there's a really great opportunity for a fabulous high-value mixed-use building here that contributes to the value of the city. And I believe that we can end up enhancing the investment, the civic investment and the private investment and the overall security and the safety of our city. I think that you all are invited to be part of this board because you're experts who study these things and you travel to cities and see how they work. I think one of the other points that I would like to make, if you think about cities that we travel to that have amazing built environments like Paris or Florence, Italy, or Amsterdam, I can't ever remember seeing a building like this in the core of the city. You end up having buildings where people want to live there and that you feel safe and secure as a tourist wandering around the core of the city because the residents are living up above you and they're watching these civic spaces. And I think if we make an investment in, or we allow a building like this to be built that could potentially and probably will become a nuisance building like the one in Anchorage, we're working against all the work that's been put into drafting these guidelines and to creating a kind of city that feels safe and secure and a city that we want to continue to recruit private investment. I hope those thoughts are helpful.
Mr. Chairman, we'll conclude our remarks at this time. I did want to just make one comment about the Mr. Dedman's suggestion that this proposed project would be a placeholder for some future development. I just don't think that's a realistic comment. The amount of investment that would be required to build this parking garage structure dictates that it will be there for a long time. So it's not to suggest that this is in some way a temporary or a short-term proposal. I don't think that's accurate. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you have, and we'll turn the podium over to other speakers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have anybody else in the audience that would like to be heard?
We do, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Eric Groves. I'm an attorney, and I'm proud to say that today I represent John Michael Williams, who has practiced law in his current location for many, many years. He has an interest in the real estate that is known as the Williams Box Law Firm. For those of you who may have visited there, it's on the south side of the park and is a lovely building with a lovely entrance and a garden. Mr. Williams feels very strongly about the inappropriateness of this proposal. I'm going to try to avoid repeating a lot of the things that Kelly Work said. I'm going to try to fill in a few holes here and there. First of all, I want you to be sure you understand the identity of the applicant. It is, although Scott Dedman has listed himself as the applicant, he acts on behalf of TBL Parking, which is an LLC, private LLC. Its managing member is the Police Association, which is a not-for-profit corporation. The Police Association is not the FOP, has no association with the FOP. It is an independent entity. One of the things I emphasized in my brief, which I hope you had the opportunity to read, was the nature of the ordinances that govern in this case.
Eric, I've even got sticky notes.
I'm glad to hear that, Chuck. That's good. What I tried to emphasize in the brief was not only what the design standards say, but how they must be obeyed. I pointed out in the brief, and I want to emphasize today, that in this jurisdiction, both as a matter of state law and as a matter of city law, the word shall is mandatory. It is a command, and I believe I cited a case that says when the law says shall, discretion is not there. In this case, we have ordinances which control. The design framework, of course, is not an ordinance. It is guidelines, but you are required to pay attention to them, and you do have some discretion. But for the most part, what the ordinances say must be complied with. And we made 3 points in our brief, and I'll reiterate them now. As far as the height of this proposal is concerned, it is clearly out of scale, and talking about other buildings from other times or buildings from other locations, really not relevant. This proposal comes into a context that already exists. We all know what that context is, and it is the obligation of the applicant to conform to the context. And that context is an average of buildings that are 2 stories tall, the tallest one of which is 3 stories. It is also a monumental area with 2 iconic buildings on either end of the park of Art Deco style. The park itself is a special place to be, and that is the context in which the proposal is made. Now, the design guidelines into which a lot of people poured a lot of work, as Commissioner Gales has said, say vinyl, aluminum, and sheet metal siding shall not be permitted. That word shall leaves no discretion. That's a command, mandatory. And we have to ask the committee to comply with it. With respect to the precast concrete, it is not listed among allowable materials, so that too is a command. As far as height is concerned, we think that trying to skirt the height issue by referring to trying to make a 6-story building into a 4-story building is not a viable theory. I handed out some exhibits that are involved with what I'm saying. I'd like you to direct your attention to the last page, which is Exhibit C of those exhibits. This is a state statute. It's in force now, been in force for some time. I'm going to read it. I'm going to take out the irrelevant proportions and read it as it applies here. And what it says is, whenever the provisions of a local ordinance impose higher standards than any other applicable ordinance or regulation, then the provisions of the local ordinance or regulation which impose higher standards or greater restrictions shall govern. So what the City Council did here was to compile and enact as law stricter standards than you might find if you just looked at what is permissible in this particular zoning district. Those standards are the ones to which we ask you to adhere. All we ask is that the law be obeyed. Now, 1 or 2 other things. Then I'm going to introduce a couple witnesses of my own. In my many years of doing this kind of work, I have rarely seen so much unanimity of opinion among people who have the knowledge and experience to comment on projects like this. I am impressed with the protest, the level of protest from people who are invested around the park. I'm impressed with the fact that people who have projects even nearby have expressed an interest, like Dick Tannenbaum, who did the Montgomery, signed this petition. If ADG's position on this is correct, then all those other people have to be wrong. I have to be wrong. John Michael has to be wrong. The Boxes have to be wrong. Pete White has to be wrong. Nick Gales has to be wrong. This long list of people who advised you against approval would all have to be wrong. I don't think they are. I'm going to call a couple people of my own. First, I want to call an architect with whom I imagine you're all acquainted. He is a dean of architects here in the city. I've known him 40 years. I couldn't recite all the projects he's done, and he served on this very committee. I think he was on this committee when it started. Wasn't it, Jim? So Jim Loftus needs no further introduction. We've asked him to comment on this project.
You forgot he's a croquet champion.
What's that?
Chuck, I see you survive. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members, and staff. I come before you today in opposition to the proposal of the Police Association to build a 6-story parking garage to house 262 automobiles. My focus is directed at the big picture planning issues which are at play here. My premise is that this proposal is not the best option for the association nor the citizens of Oklahoma City. Let's look at the options available to the association. They propose a 262-space garage with 2/3 of the capacity reserved for police vehicles. I would suggest that the recent tax increase for additional police will increase the demand for dedicated spaces to where little parking is available to the public. This proposed location, some 2 blocks east of the new station, is not nearly as convenient as land that the association owns today, contiguous to the new station. Furthermore, the Civic Center land is much more valuable than their other parcels. There's another practical issue contained in the proposal. The proposal features 2 parking bays of 2 opposing 18-foot deep spaces separated by a 28-foot aisle. If one does the math, this results in a 128-foot wide scheme. Add 2 feet for structure, and they have a 130-foot wide building on a 125-foot wide lot. I totally agree with the 28-foot aisle, as large pickup trucks and SUVs are beginning to dominate and congest our garages. As presently configured, the site isn't wide enough. Let's turn now to the primary premise of my remarks. How can we best enhance the investment of the citizens of Oklahoma City in the Civic Center and its adjacent park? The city has recently invested $53 million in the Civic Center Music Hall. Under the superb guidance of Elizabeth Gray, we are enjoying the best musical theater in the history of Oklahoma. But where does one go following a performance to complete the experience? We are well aware of the after-theater experiences available in New York City's 42nd Street in the Theater District, and I believe that we could develop a similar experience immediately south of the Civic Center by creating one parcel for development from the Main Street Arcade east to the Williams Box Law Office. Our vision would encourage a rich mix of small food and beverage options, coupled with a jazz club, maybe some art galleries, and retail on the lower levels. This would offer opportunity for small offices, artist studios, and retail, all topped off with 3 to 5 stories of residential uses to provide a 24-hour life to the district. Balconies similar to the Box family could look out at the park. People should be enjoying this park, not police cars, where we have invested $5 million of taxpayers' money. Careful attention to the streetscape on both Main and Concord would be developed within the 180 guidelines. We believe the city could provide leadership for this concept by adding to their existing ownership via land swaps, outright purchases, and condemnation if necessary, to ultimately create the development parcel. This could be turned over to the very capable Kathy O'Connor to do her magic in seeking development proposals from the community. This could present a win-win proposition for both the Police Association and the city. The Police Association should locate their garage on land they currently own adjacent to the police station. The city should insist on completing the Grand Civic Center District with this development, which would introduce life and viability to this Concord Main Street opportunity. In closing, this garage proposal is inappropriate on several fronts. It is entirely out of scale with existing two-story buildings. It is an inappropriate land use for our Civic Center investments, and if built, it would destroy a terrific opportunity for our $58 million of investment in the Civic Center and the park. I trust that this committee will see the potential of this opportunity and that you will vote no and begin the process of a win-win solution for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I wanted to add one other thing about the Civic Center. My own personal experience, I served on that first MAPS board, and it took us 10 years to get through those projects. And one of the things we wanted to be sure of with the Civic Center was, with Rick Brown, who was the architect, who did a terrific job on the interior, I think, was don't change the exterior. It's iconic, and we wanted to keep it that way. And that's, of course, one of the reasons we're here today. The next person I want to call is my client, John Michael Williams, who I'm proud to say I've known for the last 40 years or so. And I can't think of another lawyer who has made greater contributions to the welfare of this city, as I mentioned in my brief. So, John.
Good morning. John Michael Williams, 522 Concord Drive, Oklahoma City. People may ask, many people, what am I doing here? I'm not someone who protests things. I'm not someone who tries to stop development. I make development happen. So there's a very interesting, and plus I'm for parking garages. I like parking garages downtown. So what am I doing here? Well, I have a brief story to tell you, and think of me a lot like Elizabeth Taylor and what she said to her fourth husband, I won't be with you long. I won't be with you long. This is not a long presentation. 35 years ago this month, we completed our law building at 522 Concord Drive. And in those days, we were absolutely pioneers in trying to stabilize this area. And at that time, this was not the quality area it is today, but we think that by our presence, we brought stability and future growth and development to what we now call the Arts District. And we believe we've been good stewards these many, many years. And in connection with us choosing this location and having observed the park all these 35 years, it certainly has dawned on me as an urban planning lawyer that when I go to other cities, I see these fantastic parks that are just about the size of Bicentennial Park, and they have lively development around them of just the sort that Richard McCowan described. In fact, he was describing Rittenhouse Square in Philadelphia, which is just alive. And we can have that with Bicentennial Park. We have underutilized property, the vacant parking lots. Those are great opportunities to go build something that's appropriate for the location, that's the right scale, that's the right use, that is no more than 3 stories in height, which it's recognized there's a 3-story minimum. That's the right height. Other buildings are 2 stories. 3 stories makes more sense. I'm for 3 stories. Now, continuing this further, though, just another comment. The kind of picture that we'll then have if we develop both sides of the park in accordance with the precedent that you will set today by your vote, that's the sort of thing that when we had telephone books, we put pictures on the front of the telephone book for things that the city was proud of. That's the kind of picture that would be on the cover of a telephone book. It's the kind of picture that would be on the cover of the annual financial report of the city of Oklahoma City, seeing this wonderful, alive place that's alive not just during the Arts Festival, but other times. So I said to myself, this is an opportunity lost if we allow this parking garage to go forward. And so I'm a neighbor. If neighbors aren't going to do something about it, who is? So I decided I'd hire lawyers, and I hired Eric Groves and Ami Swank, his associate, who are both excellent lawyers, and I appreciate their willingness to take on this case. So if not me, who? And so I say to you, if who is going to stop this, if not you? Who? You get to make the decision. And here is a closing comment, and that is that planning, urban planning, can be defined as the use of intelligent foresight. Now, knowing the opportunities that exist with respect to this property and this park that you've heard about so far today, the question is, would this be an opportunity lost? And let's say you decide to let this structure go forward, this tall structure go forward, and have police cars and just cars generally looking out on the park as opposed to human beings looking out on the park. If that happens, and when the community goes and looks at that building after it's completed, will they say, oh, gee, that was just what we needed on Bicentennial Park? Or will they be aware that there were other better things to do, and will they conclude that was not the use of intelligent foresight, but to the contrary, it was an opportunity lost? Thank you.
Well, that's my lineup for today. I think there are some other folks who want to speak, and then I think our side of the case will close its presentation with the father-son combination of Dennis and David. But before we present them, if there's anyone else who wants to talk, and I believe there are a few, they should probably do so now.
Good morning. My name is Brian Griffin. I'm an attorney. Mr. Chairman, committee members, happy to be here today to represent the Griffin interests. My brother John spoke to you last meeting. Unfortunately, he was not able to be here today, but I'm representing the Griffin interests. We own the property at 603 West Main, immediately adjacent to the west of the subject parcel. We share a 175-foot common border with the police lot. We have a surface lot that runs from Concord to Main Street. We, in turn, are bounded on the west by the two-story office building utilized by the attorney and accountant that has that building. I don't want to take your time to go back over the excellent comments that have been made, the briefs that have been submitted by Mr. Groves and Kelly Work. I think speak for themselves. They were very complete and I think articulate very forcefully the fact that this building is clearly outside of meeting the guidelines of the downtown framework. It's too tall, it's too massive. The ugly concrete materials that are to be utilized, I think, are totally incompatible with the design guidelines. As Jim Loftus said, it fails in many regards, and as both Richard McCowan and John Williams just said, and I haven't actually visited with either of them, but it's ironic because I was going to mention Rittenhouse Square. My son just graduated in May with his MBA from Wharton, and he lived on Rittenhouse Square while he was getting his MBA at Wharton. And that park is truly a gem. It's the kind of place that I think Bicentennial Park could someday be. It's about the same size. It's got a wonderful mix of residential and commercial. Restaurants are at the ground floor of virtually every building surrounding this park, and it's vibrant from early morning till late at night. It's the place to be in downtown Philadelphia. And the number of people that are there is about what you would expect during our arts festival, and that's just every day of the year. It's a beautiful gem for Philadelphia, and it's something that I would call to your attention, and each of you should take a moment if you have a chance to Google Rittenhouse Square in Philadelphia, and I think you'll be very impressed, and I think it gives you the kind of idea that this park could someday be. It's something that, as John Williams said and Richard McCowan, the type of mixed-use development, and Jim Loftus also, the type of mixed-use development that provides the ambiance and accentuates the beauty we already have there with the magnificent Civic Center, the City Hall. This whole corridor is a gem for Oklahoma City, and I think that you have before you a very difficult decision, because what you decide today will set the precedent for this area. I would, and I hadn't even talked to Jim about this, but I was going to suggest, and I'm a owner of property on this, so I mean it's going to impact me, and I would say that my brother John and I are the most impacted directly of any protesters here today, along with the Box family who own the 529 building, of course John Williams with his law firm and Dennis's law firm there together. But I think it is a very good idea for the city and obviously your committee to recommend perhaps to the city that they exercise the right of eminent domain to consider acquiring this property until a master plan can be developed that fully brings the kind of development to this area that I think all of us here in this room today hope to see. And lastly, I would just leave you with kind of a visual I came up with, you know, as Kelly Work said in his excellent presentation. This 68-foot sheer concrete wall on the west side, which is our side of the property, as well as on the east side, are going to be visible. Those two walls, and I think it's a stretch to call them attractive, those two walls will be visible from all the patrons entering and exiting the Civic Center, as well as people entering and exiting the City Hall. And I don't know if you've ever had a chance, I did it when my boys were young, but if you've ever taken the Hoover Dam tour, you spend several hours walking through the bowels of the Hoover Dam. They have miles of corridors in there, believe it or not. And you finally emerge at the base of the dam, right at the Colorado River, and they tell you to turn around and look up. And you look up and you see this massive concrete wall. And that's kind of how I feel it'll be if someone were standing on our property looking up at this 68-foot plain concrete wall. Also, when the west sun is hitting on it, you can imagine what kind of reflection and heat will be generated. It'll essentially make, I think, the office building to our west and our parking lot Death Valley. And then just a final point, and this is something for the committee to consider, but our lot is 50 feet wide. We have 175 feet of depth from Colcord to Main Street, but we're 50 feet wide, and we're bounded on the west by that two-story office building. So effectively, it's going to be a difficult thing to find a viable use for that 50 feet to be developed in an attractive manner that will enhance the park and the ambiance of the park and the Civic Center. So it's just one more consideration to think about, because that will probably remain an alleyway. We have a surface parking lot and we'll continue to use it as that, but it'll probably just be an ugly eyesore as a surface parking lot for many years, because once the 6-story Great Wall of China gets built there, Hoover Dam, and we're bounded on the west by a 2-story office building, we're limited in what will happen there. So it means that the park will also be exposed to that for the foreseeable future. So with that, I would just like to say again that we humbly ask that this committee refuse and deny the application. Thank you.
My name is D. Frank Plater, Jr. I own and occupy 610 Colcord Drive, next door in Death Valley, as I've just heard. Also, I need to tell John Williams nobody uses phone books any longer, so they don't know what you're talking about. The last time when I was here, I heard about the uses of the parking spaces and stuff like that. There'd be 125 policemen there. So when I talked to my staff about that, they went and did a survey, which is the only thing I'm going to share with you to take a few minutes, for the last month, of how many people actually use that surface lot that police own. It has 60 surface spots. The maximum use of that spot was 35 spots on the morning of the August 4th. It had 33 other times in August. It hasn't had above 28 in September. The average use of that spot is about that lot is about 26 parking spots. So we worry about where they're coming from. We've been approached several times by people downtown wanting to park in our lot, generally when a downtown Cottbus lot was closed for remodeling. I don't believe anybody's going to come in. I heard from Mr. White that the other two Cottbus lots are the ones who have more space and less financial ability, so I think there's lots of parking in our area. Our conclusion was the only thing they're trying to do is capture Civic Center parking and Arts Festival parking. The access to this garage will be off of Colcord Drive and off of Main Street. During the Arts Festival for 3 weeks, Colcord Drive will be closed, which will increase a lot of the traffic on Main Street. A lot of the Arts Festival stuff is during the day, which impacts us. The Civic Center stuff is at night, doesn't normally impact us, although, as said, I'm a CPA and an attorney, so we're there late nights a lot of times during tax season, which is the Arts Festival. So we oppose this garage and would like for you to have it turned down. Thank you.
Members of the committee, my name is Dennis Box, and standing next to me is David Box. As John indicated, we have been in our offices since 1982. I, more than anybody, probably have seen the great development that has taken place. Ron Bradshaw and his condominiums. Chris and I live at 516 Colcord Drive, which is just 2 doors down from the law office. And that park has been a wonderful amenity. We've enjoyed it. Now you see people doing yoga, walking their dogs, doing exercise, all kinds of things. So the opportunities for that park, as described in other cities, is definitely there. I guess I own an anomaly. When I bought the Grace building, I thought I was buying a building that needed to be rehabbed and remodeled. That anomaly has, I think, improved. It has retail uses, office uses, and the only thing I would ask is, as you all consider this, I dealt with this situation about 3 years ago with the police association, and they came to me and said, we want to build a high-rise parking garage. What do you think? And I said, I think it's a very bad idea on this site, but I will support you on your site just next to the police station. They also, at that time, were talking about obtaining the city property, which is just west of the Civic Center, and I said I would support them on that. Fast forward to 2015, I was involved, dealt with the planners, dealt with Planning Commission, and also the City Council when these design guidelines were put into place. And frankly, I think they were put into place just for this situation, because the regulations, and this was poo-pooed earlier, but it's pretty clear that that's too tall. Well, that is exactly the situation we have here. Thank you all for your service. We hope you'll make the right decision, and thank you very much.
David Box, 522 Colcord Drive and 529 West Main. I've got a little, perhaps different perspective. It is a bit ironic that I find myself here at this podium in this position. One of the things when we started this process that Mr. Gross touched on, we were impressed by, is the level of protest citywide, developers-wide, architects-wide. We didn't have to go drum up protests. They came to us. Any developer that's done wonderful things downtown has decided that they, too, think this is an opportunity lost. My generation, we kind of represent a change in the way that this city is moving. We're the first generation in a while that we decided we wanted to stay in Oklahoma City. The last 2 decades, the city has done a tremendous job in making Oklahoma City, but specifically downtown, a place that people want to be. People, not cars, people. I have lived downtown 2 separate times. I lived in the Montgomery. I lived there when I was single and in law school, and then I lived there when I was married with children. One of the things that we did when I lived there when I was married was we'd walk to the park with the kids. What that park represents is a wonderful opportunity for this city. It represents an opportunity to continue the momentum that we've had for the last 2 decades to make this a place where people don't want to just come and leave, but they want to be here, they want to live here, and they want to stay downtown. By building this structure, you are foreclosing forever the opportunity that presents itself on this park. The idea that this is a placeholder is just absolutely not accurate. The millions of dollars it will cost to build this structure will mean it will be here forever. It will be here for generation after generation. It is not a placeholder. This is their permanent desire, and that's what this site will be, and that's unfortunate because of what this park presents. The guidelines are clear that structures on the park should be subservient to the wonderful placeholders on the end of this park, that being City Hall, which we stand in here, and the Civic Center on the other side. There is no doubt that if you leave the Civic Center or you leave this building, the very first thing that your eyes will be drawn to will be that structure. That is not subservient. That is the focal point. It stands out. The architecture is absolutely inconsistent. If you look at the guidelines, again, it is important that in 2015, just 2 years ago, the City Council, this body itself, the Planning Commission, all passed resolutions on what downtown development should be. And specifically, they say a 5-story next to 2-story, and no one's actually quoted this, issues of context-sensitive development vary from a building that is too tall for its surroundings left. So here, a 5-story is too tall next to a 2-story. They seek a 6-story next to a 1-story. And as Mr. Williams said, hey, 3-story, we get it. But the guidelines are 3 to 5. This is a unique block. Everything is 1 and 2-story, and we believe part of that is because it's on the park. We want the park to be a space where people want to go, where they feel comfortable going, and by approving this development, we believe it will forever foreclose the ability for this park and the surrounding properties to develop at its highest potential. Thank you for your time.
So I want to check in with our committee and see if there's any questions or comments. Certainly heard from a lot of perspectives, and just want to check in with our thought process here.
More people want to speak about this. Right?
Are those that want to speak?
So could we take a break first?
Guess we can do that. So let's take let's come back here at 11:45, 6 minutes. So okay. Yeah. So we'll reconvene at 11:45.
have kind of a
Welcome back. We have quorum now, so I want to reconvene so we can resume with the comments and the deliberation. Been informed that there's a meeting here at 1:30, and certainly they're going to need time to repurpose the room for that meeting. It's scary to think that we might be bumping into that, but I just want to make sure that we're aware of that, because we do have another item after this one as well. So if we can resume with the comments from the audience at this time.
Thank you, sir. My name is Gore Gaines, and I'm an attorney. I represent Municipal Employees Credit Union. MECU has an office located at 101 North Walker, which, if I saw the map that Mr. Wirt handed out earlier, right there at the corner of Main and Walker, it was erroneously marked blue. MECU is here because we support this mixed-use parking garage. We would absolutely love to have a parking garage on this block. Parking has been a struggle for MECU for a long, long time, and we would like to have as many as 25 parking places if we could. Not only would we use those for our employees, but we're operating a credit union, a banking institution, if you will, and our customers need to have the convenience to be able to walk only a short distance and come into our location. Otherwise, we're at a competitive disadvantage. If this mixed-use parking garage is allowed to be constructed, our members and customers can park there and walk no farther than the distance of walking from your car at the Walmart parking lot in and come into our location. We also have a drive-through just on the other side, immediately on the other side of the proposed location. So we're a neighbor on both sides, and we absolutely support this. Now, that was actually all I came here to say, but I did really enjoy listening to some very eloquent lawyers and lawyers of lawyers make very good presentations today. And you know, one of the things that lawyers do is we focus on the things that are in favor of us, and we try to ignore or gloss over the things that aren't in our favor. And so I just wanted to make a couple of just very brief observations. There's been discussion that this is a parking garage and that it would be better if it were mixed use. Well, what I see is mixed use. It's retail and it's parking. There's been discussion that it should not aesthetically be approved because it doesn't match the brick or stucco buildings immediately around it. Well, obviously it matches the Civic Center across the street. So I guess the question maybe would be what's more important. But it looks like a really good match to me. There's been discussion that it's too tall. It shouldn't be approved because there are 1- and 2-story buildings and vacant parking around in the area. Well, it doesn't make sense to me that really underutilized properties, 1-story buildings or 2-story buildings around here should dictate what this building should look like. This landowner wants to build a parking garage that's consistent with the neighborhood, and obviously this neighborhood, this entire block is going to be developed at some point. It's not going to stay 1-story buildings. So that was another observation. My last observation, well, I actually had 2 more. There's been discussion that some people would really like to see this as a residential, this lot used for residential purposes. Well, the protestants here today are landowners in the immediate vicinity. If they want to build residential, let them build residential. There's plenty of space for that. And if they do build residential, there will still be the need for parking, maybe even more so at that point. The last thing is I've heard that, well, this park across the street, Centennial Park, is for people, not for cars. But I agree with the observation that somebody made earlier, that downtown is not just for the people that live downtown. Downtown is for everybody. People like me who live farther out, but we drive here. And we need a place to park when we come to the Civic Center. We need a place to park when we go to Centennial Park. And so MECU, the credit union, absolutely supports this project, and we hope this committee will approve it. Thank you.
Okay. Steve?
Hi, my name is Steve Mason. In the current chapter of my life, I redevelop properties in Capitol Hill and Umbrella Alley, Midtown, east of the Capitol, and involved in civic stuff, trying to improve our communities. I don't own any properties in this area, so I'm really not coming as an interested party as a property owner, but I'm coming as an individual that uses this area. I attend Lyric, I go to the Art Museum, I go to the Spring Arts Festival, I go to DOKC's dinner in that park. And this is a very important spot. It's the center of our cultural identity for the Metroplex. And as you all consider what this region should look like, please be careful to make sure that we protect this very important cultural jewel for us. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kent Gilliland. I'm the attorney for the applicant. I'm with Hall Estill Law Firm here in Oklahoma City. My office is at 100 North Broadway, Suite 2900. Clearly, we've got a topic that is emotional, and I'm not exactly quite sure where to start in the way I address the arguments that have been made. We filed a brief late yesterday, and I apologize for the timing of that brief, and I'm going to assume most of you have not had an opportunity to review that yet, but it sets forth our legal positions. And the reason we filed that brief, and the reason it was filed so late, is because of the number of written protests that we were receiving. In fact, yesterday we received the brief that was filed by Mr. Groves, and I believe yesterday we received something that was filed by Dennis Box. So it sort of seemed incumbent upon us at that point to address this in writing, whether there was sufficient time for everybody to sort of absorb that or not. But that's the reason for the timing of that brief. So I do want to apologize for that. I'm really trying to define exactly what the protest is. It sounds like it's a protest a little bit about land use. Sounds a little bit that it's a protest about aesthetics. A little bit maybe just about the height of the project that we're building. And I think one of the things I've heard, and one of the things that I strongly agree with, and it's one of our points, if there's a rule of law to apply in this case. There are municipal ordinances that are actually have been enacted that apply. And when you look at the exact rule of law, and I pulled out the ordinances and I brought them up here with me, and they're at section 59-7200. And when I go, this property is located in the Central Business District. So when I go to the table for permitted uses for this property, what I find is that a parking garage is a permitted use. To me, the land use issue is closed. When I go to the table that describes the height of this property, the minimum height of this property has to be 50 feet. We're at 65 feet. We're not trying to build some high-rise parking garage. It's a 65-story garage that basically has 13,000 feet of mixed use on the first floor, which everybody's deemed to be important, which is maybe 6 times more than the use of the property next door that's objecting. So the contribution in terms of mixed use and commercial space to the area is fairly significant. Then we've got the 5 stories of the parking garage above it. It's been described as a 6-story building. Really, it's a 5-story building. It just happens to have a roof that we can park on. And everyone wants to call that an additional 6-story. It's really a 5-story building. If you break down the downtown development framework, we recognize the importance of that framework, the work that went into it. It breaks down into 2 parts, the design standards and design guidelines. The design standards basically incorporate the zoning ordinances as something that is mandatory to follow as we go through this deal, which further breaks down the areas in downtown into these zoning districts. We're in the downtown design district, which I just pointed out, the applicable zoning ordinances. Then they're broken down into 8 development typologies. The typology that we're in is called commercial corridor. And if you go to the commercial corridor in the design development framework, and you find that on the typology compatibility matrix, you go down and you find that single use parking garage, again, is a permitted use. And these are all mandatory things that have to be followed. As far as we're concerned, at this point, there's really no land use dispute. I don't know how you can argue that a parking garage that's expressly permitted in the zoning ordinances and that is expressly permitted in the framework isn't a permitted use. I think it absolutely is a permitted use, and I think what's happened is we've got protestants here that are trying to use this committee process, in effect, to change the zoning laws. And this isn't the proper forum to do that. This committee doesn't have the jurisdiction to change the zoning laws. That's a different place. We're not seeking a variance from any zoning law. We're just wanting to fit squarely with what currently exists. If you go into the future development plan of the framework, this property is further broken down into medium density flex. When you go to the framework and you look at medium density flex, it defines the height of the buildings that are proposed for this area. This is all the work, important work that people have commented on that's been done in the last few years. So when you go to medium density flex, you look at the target density and it says it's 3 to 5 stories. In effect, we're talking about buildings that the planners wanted built between 50 and 80 feet in height. We're at 65, right smack dab in the middle. Let's discuss just a little bit about the scaling and massing. There's been a lot said about the fact that there's a 1-story building next door to us and that there's a surface parking lot on the other side. And I refer to, I believe it's, Section 4.2 of the framework that describes scaling and massing. And there's been some reference to this in the past. And it talks about properties not being built out of context with other properties. And so the way it really says its primary focus is to more closely tie design guidelines to the development typologies in the future development plan of the downtown development framework. You break this language down, you get down to the development typologies. Again, we're in the commercial corridor. The commercial corridor permits this type of property to be built. You break it down to the future development plan. The future development plan breaks us up into medium density flex, again, which the expectation for development is between 50 feet and 80 feet. We're right smack dab in the middle of that. To compare us to a 1-story building that's currently there, which, as a matter of note, could not be built today, but to compare future development based on that 1-story building that's next to us, that's 2,000 square feet, and let that control the future development of this entire area, to me, it seems nonsensical. It doesn't seem practical to do that. And there's been discussion about the fact that the area along the park should be developed for mixed use and residential, shouldn't be allowed to be used as a parking garage, notwithstanding the fact that the zoning regulations actually permit this area to be used for a parking garage. The framers, when they put the ordinances in place, when the framework was drafted, and it's only been prepared in place since 2015, had an opportunity at that point to apply different zoning regulations to this street that surrounds Bicentennial Park. They didn't. So we have to use the regulations that are currently in place. And that's what we've done. We fit squarely within the zoning ordinances as they're currently adopted. I don't want to drag this out, but there's a few other points that people have made, and I just want to kind of address them on an ad hoc basis here. And some of those points are, Mr. Groves talked about complying with the rule of law. I believe Mr. Gale talked about public trust and that we should follow the rule of law, and that public trust is eroded when the rule of law is not followed. I wholeheartedly agree with that statement. Because in this particular case, the rule of law, the zoning ordinances that are actually in place permit the use that we're proposing. I really think we're down to an argument of what this garage looks like. And we've worked with the staff. We've tried to develop a garage that fits into the area. To me, I think it looks great. I love the light columns that they've introduced since the last meeting that we have. I think the property looks good. I think it, in context with the Civic Center, Mr. Dedman, ADG, has done their very best to provide a material that complements what exists on the Civic Center. One of the protestants talked about owning the property directly west, and that it was a 50-foot wide property, and that so you walk out of the Civic Center and what you see is the Wall of China. And he made what was a discouraging comment, was that they don't plan to ever develop their property. To me, that's more discouraging than the fact that we're trying to build something that complies with the zoning ordinances. If they were to develop their property, and we'd love for them to develop it in the residential way, they would have to develop that property 50 feet. So at that point, it covers up 50 feet of the side of that wall. So we're trying to plan for the future as opposed to stick in the past. That's all I've got. I appreciate your time. I know this has been a long morning. I'm happy to address any questions you've got. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments?
I wonder if I might offer a brief rebuttal to the remarks of Mr. Gilliland.
Sure.
I want to make clear to the committee that we are not arguing that the one-story building controls this situation. It is just an example of buildings around the park. We are not suggesting that buildings in the future should be one story tall. Mr. Gilliland emphasized that a parking garage is a use of right in this particular zoning district. Indeed it is. But the development of that use of right is subject to review by this committee. And that is why I handed you a copy of the statute which says the stricter standard controls. So we have no quarrel with a garage as a use of right in the zoning district. It is. That's the law. But it's qualified. The design of the garage has to be approved by this committee. And there is one other thing that I want to mention. In the exhibits I handed out today, Exhibit A, which is the first page of the exhibits, copies Section 7200.1, subsection A, which is the purpose and intent of the design districts. And subsection 2 says they are to ensure that a proposed use is compatible. And I highlighted it and then underlined it in red. Ensure that a proposed use is compatible. Now, we're not asking you to rezone this property. We're not suggesting that the uses that are allowed of right in this zoning district are not there. But this language in this ordinance, which controls, does give you the right to consider, at least in a functional sense, whether the proposed use is compatible. And I think we hopefully have established that it is not. So we ask you to deny the application. Thanks so much.
So, any comments from our committee? We've taken in a lot of information, and I'm sure we see both sides. And Owner Chuck, if you want to add any commentary at this time, or do we have any other comments from the audience before we get into our discussion?
Well, I told somebody this morning that I've thought about this case more than I've thought about myself in the last couple of weeks, which is rare. I've been on this committee for, since the beginning, for 10 years, and over that period of time, we've had the opportunity to hear a lot of cases. I would say that this case probably is at the top of the list in terms of the two factions or two groups not being able to come to some agreement on it. So, I spent a lot of time, Eric and Dave and Box and everybody looking at this thing. I haven't spent much time, and the city staff has put together a report that's about an inch thick, and I'd like to compliment everyone for all the time and effort you've put in on this thing. But as I look at this, I see our job on the DDRC as to reflect some degree of what the public in this city would like. And I have never seen as many different factions come together, both property owners, city planners, architects, and people from all over the city, city leaders that oppose this design and plan because of its size and use. So as I look at that, and in particular, I agree that parks are important. I think what surrounds parks are important, and I think that projects should have some degree of public support from their neighbors and community in general. And so therefore, I'm leaning toward making a motion to deny this application. If anybody else would like to speak to this.
I agree with everything that you said. There's been a lot of discussion about scale and context and material use. Because this is an extremely important case, and because both sides are so passionate, I think that it's important that it be noted that the scale that is being proposed is not reflective of the number of stories. So the fact that it is based on its height, and its height is reflective of a building that could have less stories included. I don't think that the scale is necessarily inappropriate. I don't necessarily think that that the use or the way the building materials are represented is consistent with the surrounding aesthetic. And that's a matter of taste, but it also seems to be a matter of context with respect to all the people who are being affected by this. So, although I don't feel like a building of this size could not come before the body in the future and be considered differently depending on how it looks and how it's used, I do feel like that the building in its current size and its current use is inconsistent with what's happening around the property and with all of those who are going to be directly affected by that. And I think that in this kind of a situation where we've got a real gray area, we've got to take that into consideration as well.
And from my perspective, this is certainly a special case just because it is in what is the civic center, the cultural center, identity of our downtown. It's really important. To me, the eyes on the park, the mixed use, those are all very important things. And so I also lean towards not approving this for those reasons. But certainly, this is very important, and that's why there's so many people that are involved in this. And I certainly appreciate the remarks from on both sides, and want to see more happen in this part of the city. But that's where I'm leaning at this point as well.
I'll just speak loudly. There. Thank you. I would also have to agree with Tony that I don't think the scale is bothering me so much. I do worry about listening to the passionate comments about the park, I kind of have to agree. It doesn't feel like that's the best location. I think it's really a shame that we couldn't have identified another, maybe couldn't have identified another location that might be better. But as far as the parking garage there, right there at this time, I'm probably going to also agree with the panel committee.
Okay, so what's your pleasure? Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to deny this application based on Section 4.2 of the Design Guidelines and Framework because of the, I believe it lacks the context of sensitive development, particularly in view of the park and the Civic Center. I mean, I think those should be the focal points of this area, as pointed out by staff in their comments, and so those are the reasons. That's the motion.
Second.
That's the Ainsworth and Kriegel motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. So that is not approved. Okay. Well, yes, thank you for the consideration and for the comments. So that moves us to the other item, 6B. That's DTCA-17-0083. Address is 800 Northwest 9th Street.
Hello. And I'll just very briefly go through the information on the staff report. It's kind of exciting. I think it's been a while since there's been a new medical office building up by St. Anthony's. And this is the first non-residential one that's coming in. Sorry, I'll let her get somewhere. That's coming in up in this part on the west side of Chartel. I'm sorry?
We're trying to get organized with our paperwork here.
Yeah, what's the case number? Is this
It's
83?
83.
Okay. Sorry.
It's okay.
Okay, yeah, let's pause just for a minute while we're clearing out, because it is kind of, we have a lot of
I got you.
traffic, so let's pause for about a minute and regroup.
So Paula, is the PowerPoint still there? Because I was wanting to go through the pictures. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay.
We're good. Thanks.
So in case some of you haven't been up in that area in a while, because there's some new development going on, you have the subject site, which is on the southwest corner of this intersection. Immediately north is the Lisbon Lofts, which you can see in this diagram. Catty Corner is a very large parking garage for St. Anthony's, because that is referenced in part of the information as far as the availability for parking for employees. And so just to orient you so that you can see where that is. The current site used to obviously have some houses, and so what we've included in our staff report is, for your consideration, is demolition, because there's some sidewalks and steps that were leading up to the house that are still on the site, and so that's included in what you're evaluating here. So basically, the buildings are gone, and that's what you're looking at. There are some trees on the site, and then this is immediately to the west, so there is some housing still left on this block, although within the last year or two, you've actually acted on at least one demolition of a duplex half a block away on the north side of the road. And this is on the north side of the road, immediately on the west side of the Lisbon Loft. So we have the Lisbon Lofts directly across the street that have been constructed, and there's the parking garage I referenced. And then we have to the east, there's a house, and then we have some vacant land. And then on the alley is actually the dividing line into Cottage. So what you're looking at here is projects or property that's in Cottage. So you have a new residential development, I believe those are duplexes that have been constructed. And there's a vacant lot, and then there's a house, but those are in Cottage. So this is an area that it's right on the edge of the Cottage and the downtown area. In your staff report, I clarify the items that you're not considering today. And I've written it on the plan that you will see. Because of some of the information that we didn't get at this time, you're not acting on the parking lot, the sidewalks, the landscaping, the streetscape, or the dumpster enclosure, which is in the parking lot. Additionally, you haven't been provided with the signage information, so none of those are in consideration, although the signs are shown on their renderings, just to give you an idea. So I wanted to clarify that. The items that we pointed out that they provided information on, one deals with the requirement for 50% glass, and there was an explanation which staff totally agrees with. Because of the use of the buildings as exam rooms, they really can't have as much glass as the 50% requirement. So staff actually felt that guideline, their explanation was justifiable for why we don't have that much glass on the east side of that building. Additionally, there is an issue that staff referenced, which is also a guideline, but we felt strongly enough about it that we made a condition, which deals with the fact that there is no pedestrian entry oriented toward the street. And we've quoted those guidelines in our documentation. However, staff felt that this is something that could actually be resolved between staff and the applicant, if the committee so agrees. And we acknowledge that there are all kinds of different ways to create a focal point. We feel it should have an entrance, but if not an entrance, it could do some different design feature on the building so that it would have the interest to the sidewalk. And so staff is recommending that it be approved, subject to the condition that they submit revised elevations for the Northwest 9th Street or the North Chartel facade to add an entrance and or focal design element, and they submit it to the planning staff for review and approval. Okay, now let me get to the applicant's presentation. Is it down here? I think it is. Yes. No, let me get that. Let me just make this go away. Oh. I was going to hit escape, but I don't have an escape button on my. Thank you. Would you like to drive it?
How's it feel to be on that side?
Yeah. Wow, you guys have had fun today, right?
Yeah.
Welcome to DDRC. Whoa. Okay. I'm really excited to present this project to you today. I do feel like it embodies the ordinance pretty well, so we will talk about it. First of all, the site, as Laura mentioned, is right on the border between the Cottage District and a DTD1. And it is in the same area as, the buildings on 10th Street, the big St. Anthony garage, which Laura showed you. Okay, how do you move it forward? Okay, so the building is just about a 9,000 square foot ground floor doctor's office building. It's very, very efficient. So it's not a huge office space. The whole building is about 17,000 square feet. We really could not build a one-story office building or any kind of building in this area because the ordinance says it has to be at least 30 feet tall. Our building is 31'6" to the parapet all the way around the building, and that's the street frontages. The building orientation is primarily on Chartel and secondarily on 9th Street. And the materials we borrowed from surrounding buildings in the area. So we tried to be very cognizant of the residential use as well as some of the office use. DDD 1 requires that the building is a minimum of 30 feet. The Cottage District area has a maximum of 50 feet. So for all intents and purposes, the empty lot to the south of this could be 50 feet tall. The buildings are required to be built within 10 feet of the property line, which is a little different than the Cottage District. But on this side of that line, they're required to do that. And office use is accepted as a use. And so what the ordinance says in the purpose and intent, is to promote a high-quality mix of commercial office and residential uses, including the uses in a single building, mixed uses in a single building. And once upon a time when this area was first developed, I think a lot of the vision was to see work and live in one building. So that hasn't necessarily happened, but that was the vision. Okay, and the development pattern for this area, as you can see, the red is commercial and office. The purple is like multifamily. It's more than one house per lot, or more than one living unit per lot. And then the brown is the undeveloped space. So as you can see along Chartel, and I don't have any way to drive a mouse, do I? I mean, oh, yeah, I do. So Chartel is this street right here, if you can see that. The development pattern along that street is primarily office at this point. Who knows what it's going to be in the near future, because there are 2 empty lots. The project site, as Laura mentioned, is on the corner of 9th and Chartel. I'm excited about this site because there is a great view coming up 9th Street from St. Anthony. And it's really a nice way to kind of give pedestrians and motorists alike kind of an end to the street. So we tried to take advantage of that. And just to address the parking issues and the siting of the building, there are 2 buildings just about a block north of here. This building was reviewed by DDRC. It has a parking lot in front of the building, and that is not what we like to do. This existing building right here may be a placeholder for something in the future, but we'd rather not see the parking on the street. This other building right here, it has been a medical office building. It's been a lot of different things, but it's way off the street, and it's got a big parking lot in front. In both cases, both of those buildings are used for medical office use, but they have parking in the front. It's very common for medical office buildings to need the parking adjacent to the entry. So both of these have the parking in front of the building in order to get the entry on the front of the building. So we looked at a bunch of different ways to configure this site. This parking lot would be very much like this parking lot down here if we put the parking on Chartel, and I just really don't feel like that is in accordance to the ordinance. We could do the same thing, put parking on the 9th Street. We could put the building oriented toward 9th Street and pull the parking down, but we felt like that put a lot of this office use into the neighborhood. And the way we chose to do it was to orient the building to Chartel and then take advantage of those views and vistas. This is the site plan. And then this would be the corner, that would be that view up 9th Street. And this is just to talk about, we know, believe me, I know that we want to have glass on Chartel and on 9th Street. That's very clear in the ordinance. And we tried to do as much as possible. So this is the Chartel side of the building where we put as much glass as we could. Now these are actually offices here, and these are offices down there. But there is a way to engage with the pedestrians. And on this side, this is the waiting room for the most part. And so we really tried to push the amount of glass that we could get in this building. Oh, and by the way, I did block out the signage because the owner wanted me to, because they're not sure how they're going to brand this building. So that's why that's blocked out.
And it wasn't part of what you're deciding on today anyway, so.
Yeah, we'll have to get approval on the signage. This is the south side of the building. These are all offices. And by the way, an office space is so much more compatible with residential use than other possible uses of this lot. This is the west side of the building, and it does kind of look like the back side of the building. Get more exam rooms here. Tried to get more glass, but this is not on the street. Okay, the materials that we chose, we borrowed from various buildings around the neighborhood. We chose this, it's hard to see here, but corrugated metal that has been used on a couple of different houses. It's right in this area. We chose black brick, which is similar to this building, and we chose the fiber cement panels that are similar to what is being used on the lift apartments. Thank you. It was one of our projects. And I apologize. This is kind of, could we lower the light level? Okay, I won't be. Okay. So this is just to kind of talk about the massing on Chartel because that seemed to be an issue. The Lisbon Lofts is 35 feet to the front line here, and 33 feet to here, and I don't know how tall this tall element is. The building below it was built before DDRC, as we pointed out. It's very, very short. And then the dialysis clinic required a variance to get that height. Here's the massing comparison. This is 31'5", and this is 33 feet. So, and these are right across the street from each other. This building may actually be downhill a little bit, so it may actually be a little bit shorter than the other building. Parking garage across the street, the house across the street. Laura's already gone through all this with you. These are the other buildings on Chartel south of the project. All of them are at least 30 feet tall. So the massing is not, I don't think, an issue with this. There's vacant land on both sides of Chartel, as I mentioned. And this is the building again. And I think I covered everything. Is there anything? Any questions?
Yeah, I saw the staff report talking about adding something to the Northwest 9th Street facade. Did you address that?
Well,
I was going between
I
reading
think I think the staff was looking to kind of explore that and move that off to an administrative approval. We feel like it's very much, and I think I addressed this in the scope, did I not? The neurology practice really needs their patients to know exactly where the entry is, and it's important because a lot of them will be on walkers and in wheelchairs. It's important for them to understand exactly where that entrance is. So to have a second entrance off of 9th Street, which they will never be, they'll never be coming from 9th Street, would confuse them, and they might walk further than they need to. But I do need to address the parking real quick. The parking, there's 27 spaces. We're still trying to work out a few more on that site. There will be landscape barriers between the street and the parking lot. And the staff will be parking in the parking garage, and there will be valet parking for these patients. So that's how they have thought through how they would do everything with this building.
And just, I should have mentioned this earlier, you had a couple of pieces of correspondence that you received, and the people that wrote those are actually here today and want to speak. There's actually 3 people here, and so I just wanted that, so they're not just carrying over from listening to 2 hours of another.
We'll make sure.
Yes,
they
okay.
get from them.
Anyway, anything else? Did that answer your question?
So are you open to adding something? I guess what I read, it didn't have to be an entrance. It could be some
They
other
talked
feature.
about the possibility of some kind of artwork or maybe a sign on the street that would lead people to that entry, and definitely we're up for that. But that's something that we'd like to look at.
Betsy, so I understand they need to come from the parking lot into that area, so what I'm wondering is on the northwest corner, can there not be another door right there, so they're coming into sort of a shared lobby right there, 2 entrances coming in together, or do you still think that would be confusing if it's that close to the parking lot?
We looked at it, and it's something that is a possibility, but we'd like to work that. The owner wasn't crazy about it because he feels like that's kind of bad for his patients, but we can certainly work through that with the staff. We're okay with that.
Would that meet your requirements, Laura?
Well, it's a guideline, but yes,
Guideline.
that is an option, because that would be on the street frontage, and that would definitely be in conformance with that guideline.
Okay, thank you.
So we looked at, I don't want to, Julie, I don't want to throw this out as real, but we did look at doing this, which would be an entrance like that. There would be some significant changes to the floor plan inside, and I'm really not sure it does everything that anybody wants it to do. So I think that's something that we really would have to work through with the staff and make sure that it's, satisfying all of those requirements that we want to satisfy. But that is definitely the one place that would be appropriate to add that on the northwest corner.
Any other questions?
I think that if you were able to identify something with staff as far as a contrasting element rather than an opening into the building, something that just drew your eye if somebody was walking on the street, it would then pull them directly to that entrance. It would probably meet the intent of the guidelines. I'm curious about, with respect to the parking, will there be a written document that gets drafted or some kind of a agreement between the parking structure that they will be able to use that for any period of time? Or is that a requirement in this kind of a situation where you have a shared parking with an off-site?
What I would say is, since we don't require parking, So we don't require parking in DBD, DTD1, or DTD2.
Okay.
It is not required. Now, we all know that if they don't have parking, the use won't work. So whatever arrangements they make in their best interest to make sure they have enough parking is great. Whatever.
That answers my question.
But Laura did look into the street parking in that area. There is no parking on that side of the street on 9th Street. So,
yeah, and they're still looking into that. The sign's been up for a really long time, and the north side of the street parking is allowed except down at the other corner. So, and there is no parking on the street on Chartel.
But the nice thing about an office use, because this is a 8 to 5, 9 to 5 type of use in comparison to residential use, is generally the people that will be coming to this office building will be there in the daytime and not at night. So I think that's a lot of people, I know the Midtown area is talking about ways to get shared parking for nighttime use versus daytime use. Anything else?
Yeah, I have a question. You said that there was going to be valet parking, but if you look at the parking lot, I know we're not supposed to look at the parking lot, but we are. It's not intuitive that that would be valet parking.
Well, we would have to work through that. The parking, I don't know where they'd set up a valet stand. Is that what you're concerned about?
Well, you've got your handicap parking right outside the door, and so they couldn't be there. And so then they'd have to go quite a ways away in order to set up anything that would look even resemble. I mean, usually when you have valet parking, there's a place to pull over.
Right.
And that doesn't exist. As drawn, it doesn't look like that would work.
That's something that we would have to work through. And we haven't yet. Anything else?
Thank you. So this is the time now, if there's any citizens that wish to be heard, this is your opportunity.
Okay, great. Thanks. Flip the sheet over.
Hello, my name is Kent Ward. Thank you for letting me speak. I live at 807 Northwest 9th Street, directly north, across the street of this plan or proposal. I'm speaking in opposition to this. Essentially, west side of Chartel along 9th, 8th, and 7th Street is largely residential, is poised to be mostly residential, or all residential. It looks like this is maybe a private-owned building and practice, but it was purchased from St. Anthony's, the part of the lot. The plans have St. Anthony's branding on the building. For all intents and purposes, it looks like St. Anthony's office building. To the east side of Chartel, Saints owns nearly a full block of vacant land. Further east, closer to Walker, they own large surface parking. These areas seem to be a much better location for this type of use, whereas the west side of Chartel seems to just be better off for residential. I want to echo the comments from the committee about the guidelines. We're going to get into parking. Parking seems to be the theme of the day. It totally does just completely close off 9th and Chartel as proposed to pedestrian access, street access, sidewalk access. With only 27 parking spots for this 17,400 square foot office building, there's going to be a lot of pedestrians coming from what's supposedly is, I guess, an agreement to park in parking garage and surface lots on the east side of Chartel. At the very least, you got to have some kind of insurance for those pedestrians coming across there. I mean, the majority of people are going to be coming across from Chartel. With only 27 parking spots for this building, it's woefully inadequate. Medical office, typically 4 to 5 parking spots per 1,000 square feet is typical. This doesn't even hit 2 per 1,000 square feet. I think it's inadequate just for even if it was a one-story building. I counted 18 exam rooms, what appear to be exam rooms, roughly 9 offices. Say the employees are going to park across the street. 18 exam rooms with some overlap. 27 just doesn't do it. I know this because my office is surrounded by medical offices, and those parking lots stay full. So what you're going to have is essentially 9th Street just going to fill up with more and more cars. It's already a narrow street. When you got cars parked on the curb, two-way traffic is very difficult to get by. It's just a very narrow space. The parking issue is probably the number one issue. Is just very inadequate with 27 parks, especially for medical office, which requires more than most office spaces. In regards to employees parking across the street, maybe they will. From experience, we know Oklahomans don't typically like to walk 100 yards from their car to their office. That's the walk it's at minimum is going to take, whether they park on surface lots of Saints south of 9th Street, it's about 100 yards away, or if they're parking in the garage. There's no great access into that garage on 9th and Chartel. There's one staircase that goes to the basement that's further up, closer to 10th, or you have to come all the way off of, what's the one to the east, maybe Dewey or Lee? It's a long walk for employees to walk their offices. I know we encourage walkability, but that's just the reality. I don't picture many people, especially on even close to bad weather days, walking that distance to the office. They're going to be parking along 9th Street and on down or overflowing from the proposed lot. And this is, we don't even know, we know what's apparently going on the first floor. We don't even know what's going on the second floor, so we have no idea what type of use that'll be, further putting more question into the little amount of parking spots they got. I just kind of want to mention the 30-foot minimum. I don't know if that's for commercial use. My 2-story townhome across the street is only 24 feet high, roughly. I do want to speak. I think this is kind of necessarily too high, 32 feet for a 2-story building. I do have worries, too. There's no details on rooftop HVAC systems, whether I will be hearing noise from those, whether the parapet is going to conceal that, how big those are. Also have very little detail on lighting and signage. This one doesn't show the sign, but the plans previously that were submitted showed St. Anthony's signage on there. One directly across the street from my bedroom. There's 5 bedrooms that will face this building. Noise, light pollution is a huge concern. I think back of Kramer back in Seinfeld and the Kenny Rogers chicken red sign coming into his apartment. I don't want a blue sign lit up all night that seeps into our bedrooms. There's 11 other permanent residents there, Lisbon Lofts. We're all in opposition to this. One is even a physician at St. Anthony's. We just think it's the wrong use for that side of Chartel on 9th Street, where it's poised to be more residential as it's been done on 9th, 8th Street, north side of 7th Street, on the west sides of Chartel. And that's it. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to be heard on this topic?
Hi, I'm Steve Mason, and I live 1 block south of the proposed project at 824 Northwest 8th. and spent a lot of time worried about our communities with the redevelopment work I've been doing in civic efforts. Everyone in this room has strong respect for Betsy. Both her and Scott Debman designed my house a block south, and she, as you know, formerly served on the DDRC, so a lot of respect for her. In this previous parking garage discussion, there was a long chat about context, and nowhere in the presentation did the applicant discuss the context of the residential neighborhood. The applicant discussed the context of St. Anthony's to the east and some buildings to the north, and the context is important. You know, there's residential south, north, west, and southeast of the project. The city's currently investing about $1 million, $1.5 million in renovating the Red Andrews Park, a block south for this community of residents. And what's most important is the Lisbon Lofts, what this does to them and their character and their residential respect to them. I don't live there, but it's going to have a degrading effect on the Lisbon Lofts that I can't just describe, of this going up in front of it, and it needs to be considered. And I request that you do discuss the context with the same vigor and intensity in this discussion that you did for the prior 2 hours. Because what we saw in the parking garage discussion was context matters. And the parking garage didn't meet your all's approval because of a context issue. And it's not meeting the context of this neighborhood. It's interesting. About 18 months ago, you guys approved some condos at 6th and Francis. It was Kayla Baker's. They're 3 stories tall, and the neighborhood, of course, got upset about that. I remember Betsy talking a lot about that was a good transition from the very fast-moving traffic on 6th into a residential neighborhood. So in that discussion about those lofts, those condominiums at 6th and Francis, you all considered context in transition. And if you look across the street to the north and the south and the west, there's no transition. It's just sitting there, you know. It reminds me of that Houston zoning that we see that none of us like. They just plop ugly buildings in the middle of anywhere, and that's not a good idea. And then, Taryn's going to speak next, and Mr. Ward just spoke. I mean, there's just some design problems with the building that I would ask that you consider. Thank you.
I think just to clarify, I think 6th and Francis was probably in Cottage, so that would have been urban design. So you all, yeah, I just wanted to clarify that because they probably had no idea what was happening.
Don't throw us under the bus on that.
I was trying to help you there.
I hope I can stand. I'm a little hungry. This is my first DDRC meeting. Quite interesting. I was going to bring my lawyers, but they all left, so. I live at 805, or my name's Taryn Clark. I live at 805 Northwest 9th. I'm the middle unit, and I am really concerned about the traffic flow, obviously parking. We have a lot of pedestrians that go up and down that street. They walk their dogs. People are running, and I'm really concerned with the amount of traffic that's, for now, we have a pretty quiet street. And I think that might also be a safety issue for the residents across the street and around all the other housing. I'm also concerned about the lighting pollution and noise pollution, as Kent said earlier. Those are our bedrooms. Like, we'll be looking at a office building, and that's what we'll see. I'm not even concerned so much about the view from the top or whatnot. I'm just more concerned about there being a doctor's office across, and there will be rooms and patients, and I just don't think that it fits in our area. I also, amongst other things, home value in general will go down. You know, we wouldn't be there if St. Anthony's didn't buy that land. That's St. Anthony's. Our Lisbon Lofts is a St. Anthony's they bought. So I'm not opposed to anything St. Anthony's, but this is a private doctor who is not, he bought it from St. Anthony's. So it's when they say, oh, parking is over here, and they're talking about all the other St. Anthony's things, it's a private doctor. I mean, he he can definitely find another spot in that area instead of residential, I believe. What else do I have? If this does pass, the materials used are just not the scope of the Sosa Cottage area. I know that we're right on the line, which is weird, but it's just the amount of stucco and brick, and we have metal panels, and actually that parking garage would look really good across the street. I'm kidding. So that's all I have, but as far as context, yeah, there's 11 people that live there, and that's our house. So if you would just consider that, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Do I need to?
Yes, please do.
So anybody else to be heard on this topic? Okay. Here, go ahead.
And just to clarify, and I know Kent left, they did get, I emailed them the emails you guys sent in, Tara. Okay, yeah, no problem. So they had them before the meeting.
I just want to talk to some of the comments that were made. What it appears to be is that almost all the speakers disagree with the use of this building. And that is directly in conflict with the ordinance, because the ordinance says that this can be office space. At this point, the second floor is not a done deal. It could be residential, it could be office space. And that is really how the ordinance was set up. So we are willing to work with is it Taryn? To work on the materials if we feel like if we can find materials that would be more pleasing. We tried very diligently to come up with materials for this building that would mix into the neighborhood. Anyway, but we're definitely able to give a little bit on that, but the use is the use, and it's an accepted use in this neighborhood. So, and Chartel is a four-lane street, and it is difficult to cross. I understand because I've crossed it many times. Anyway, thanks.
Talk about, the parking and remind me again, I kind of understand what these neighbors are saying. They don't want to have cars, parked up and down their block. Did I understand that there is no parking around the
And I'll speak to that one.
Street parking
Yeah.
on?
And one, just to clarify, we're not taking action on parking today, but on 9th Street, there is no parking allowed on the south side of 9th Street.
Okay.
The side that this building is on.
Side this building on. There is parking allowed on the north side of 9th Street.
Okay. But what about the lighting issue? I kind of get that.
Okay, so we'll be very, very careful with the lighting, but that's not, that's part of what we have to send on to the next phase, because the lighting, I understand, when you've got parking lot lighting and it gets dark at 5 o'clock, so yeah, you do need some parking lot lighting. The lighting needs to be so that it doesn't create light pollution and it doesn't point toward the neighbors' houses and doesn't blind anybody in the street. There are lots of things to be considered in that. The parking, this is, okay, the physician that owns this property is a St. Anthony physician. And St. Anthony sold the land to him. And St. Anthony is going to make sure that they have parking spaces for all their staff, and they get the valet spots open for them. So that's already, and if you want something in writing, I think they can do that. But that's also not a purview of DDRC. So,
So Betsy, I've got a comment about the parking. I know, Laura, we're not supposed to talk about the parking, but it's hard to approve this without knowing the impact it's going to have. And Mr. Ward's comment that the parking ratio for medical is 4 to 5, I think that's low. Typically, medical office use is higher than that because you do have so many people coming into that and not knowing the use of the second floor and if there's going to be any sort of agreement for those people to park in the parking garage has me concerned.
One thing that I think would probably be worse for the neighborhood is if we created a gigantic parking lot on 9th Street.
Totally agree.
And I think that St. Anthony has made all kinds of concessions to provide parking for this space above and beyond the 27 spaces. We originally, and I think you can probably see it in your packet, had 6 parking spaces on the south side of the building. We're still trying to work those in, so there would be 6 spaces more. But the staff is taking care. I mean, they have run the numbers, and they are well aware that the parking lot is smaller than they would like it, and they would like to have a bigger parking lot. But I don't think I see a surface parking lot on the south side of 9th Street there.
I just want to reiterate, parking is not required. So if this project had come in, if this owner only owned the 75-foot swath and didn't even own where they're proposing the parking, they would not have, they could have filled the whole lot up with the building and not have been required to provide parking or even a parking agreement. That said, you know, where if we think we're encouraging people to park illegally on sides of the street, that there is no parking, I mean, that would be a code enforcement issue, but they're not required to have parking. It's assumed because you're in this mixed-use urban environment that you are parking elsewhere, walking elsewhere, taking the streetcar from elsewhere. And then, so the lighting isn't, the parking lot lighting is a totally big concern, but that will be evaluated when the parking lot is presented.
Steve, you had some comments. Do you have anything else, Betsy, on that? No.
I just want to respond briefly to Betsy's comment when she came up here. Basically, it was, well, the zoning, dang it, allows a medical building, so you got to do it. That's what she said. Well, that was true of the parking garage. The zoning allowed that parking garage. And after 10 lawyers, after several hours with briefs and everything, explained it to you guys, you decided context can govern. So I'm really requesting that whatever wisdom those 10 lawyers imparted on you guys, that you use the same application on this project. Thank you.
So, we need to make sure that we're watching the clock because there's a meeting in here at 1:30. So, unless there's any maybe new comments or new questions, I want to see if we have a motion or some thoughts from the committee on how to proceed.
I appreciate both sides' comments. I personally don't feel that the issue of an office building within a residential context is the same as the previous discussion about that particular parking garage in its specific aesthetic, in its context, with respect to the outcry from so many who were immediately affected. I do appreciate it, though. I do think that there are some things that can be worked out between ADG and staff and adjacent property owners, and that can be done administratively with respect to, I mean, it has to work. It still has to function, it still has to make monetary sense, but if there's an open discussion about materials, and Betsy's willing to have that discussion, if there's a document that can be provided that shows light pollution will be addressed, and that's entirely available in the spectrum of parking lot lights right now, the technology is very high, I think that that should be done. And if the parking lot's going to come back before us at another time,
Well,
then we can
typically,
hear about it then.
and we can, at one this size, we normally would have just done it administratively, but if that's your preference.
Unless there's other comments, I would be willing to make a motion then. And my motion would be that contingent upon Betsy and ADG working with staff over the upcoming months to address the parking lot, discussions on building materials, and the dumpster enclosure and adjacent landscaping, that I'd make a motion to approve it as designed.
And did I also hear in your motion the recommended conditions staff had that was more than just material, that dealt with the design and the fact it didn't have an entrance on the street?
Addressing some type of articulation of the corner.
Okay.
Not specifically an entrance.
The only thing that I would say to that is, I think that you need to give, I don't think you can delegate all that to staff as far as if you're wanting different building materials and things like that. I think that should be something that should come before you guys. I'm not sure I understand clearly what different type of building materials you'd have and if it's going to be differently designed.
Are you concerned that that leaves something open, too much open to try to
Yes.
do just on a staff administrative level?
Right, if you give some guidelines to what type of materials you're looking at, or if you want to continue it for them to come back with the materials and the design so that you could actually look and see what it looks like.
Another tool that we have in our kit would be a continuance with kind of the assumption that there'd be more talk amongst neighbors to try to come up with something.
I would really appreciate a vote today with the thought that we would be working with the staff and the neighbors to make this building more pleasing for them and get all of the issues kind of out on the table and resolved. This doctor is running out of his lease, and I know that sounds crazy, but Julie understands that leases sometimes can push a project, and we need to move on with it.
So we do have a motion, but if it doesn't get a second, then I think it doesn't have legs, but we do have a motion before us.
I just want to say, I guess, to the applicant that whatever the committee may forward to staff or entrust staff with, staff may or may not choose to send it back to committee depending on what the changes are. We may feel that they've crossed a certain threshold.
I see. Okay, so any takers on that motion?
I would like to ask Tony real quick, as far as the design goes, what's your feeling on that?
I think the design is very nice.
I do too.
I think the design looks really nice. I actually do think that the scaling and massing and the way that the forms are juxtaposed is consistent with what's happening in SOSA. I think that if there is a question about materials, I see that the materials of the SOSA architecture blending really well into the massing of the building. So I don't see an issue. I think that it would be easily resolved in a minor enough amount that staff would feel comfortable dealing with it administratively.
I second the motion.
Okay.
I was just wondering how staff feels about this. Is that?
Well, I thank you for asking. Well, one, the motion doesn't need to be qualified about all the items that need to come back, because they need to come back anyway. I think it's more clear if the committee approves or denies as it's presented, if in good faith the applicant works with surrounding property owners to make any changes to the materials, we would evaluate those as a revision. I think that's clearer for me.
Is that the way the motion needs to be presented?
Then I would, the motion would just be to approve as presented, or with the staff's condition that articulation be made.
Procedurally, can he amend his own, so it's been moved and seconded?
Yes, yeah,
He
we're not
amended
quite
it?
that formal,
Okay.
yeah, on our Robert's rules here.
Okay, so my motion is that we approve as it has been submitted, contingent upon a future review and coordination with staff and adjacent property owners. Of materials, yes,
And articulation at the entry.
and articulation at the entry.
Okay, so that's the new motion.
Second.
Second, any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. So that motion carries. Thank you, everybody. Okay, so let's see if we can jog through the ending here. We have some communication items. Lisa,
Well,
anything to call
we
out?
can just,
We have one more item we need to do, which is the...
no, I know, but the communication,
We can just-
oh, yeah, we're still not, yeah. D, item 7D is the meeting schedule, 2018 meeting schedule. Nothing about it has changed, it's still the third Thursday at 9:30, but we do need to adopt it so that we can file it with the city clerk's office.
Okay, so we have a meeting schedule that's been in our packet. It's the same pattern as the meetings that we've been doing, so any motion on that, to adopt that?
I'll make a motion to approve as
It was
Black, Ainsworth, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. We have our meeting set.
Thank you.
And I think at this point, Lisa, anything else that we need to call attention to? Anything else from staff? Okay, meeting next month.
Here's your resolution.
Oh, good. I didn't sign it, so I'll do that. So
Okay,
next
thank
meeting,
you,
October 19th.
everybody, for powering through and getting
We
a
did
lot
it.
done. Thank you.
All right. We are adjourned.
I'm very excited about our two new members here.